Hey guys, tonight we begin with something brutal. Something that will make you grateful for every single modern convenience you take for granted. We're diving deep into what life was really like as a frontline medic during World War I. Forget the romantic notion of heroic doctors saving lives with precision and grace. The truth? You're about to spend your days elbow deep in mud, blood, and body parts, performing surgery by candlelight while shells explode overhead. So before we descend into this particular circle of hell, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Congratulations! You've just been assigned to a regimental aid post somewhere along the Western Front. It's 1916. The Battle of the Somme is grinding through its bloodiest phase. The good news? You're technically behind the front lines. The bad news? Behind the front lines in World War I means you're about 200 yards from the trenches, which puts you well within artillery range, gas range, and the range of men screaming for morphine that you don't have. Your medical training consisted of 6 weeks of lectures and maybe, if you were lucky, a few days working in a civilian hospital. Now you're responsible for keeping alive soldiers with injuries so catastrophic that they would make a modern trauma surgeon weep. Welcome to your new reality. It only gets worse from here. Chapter 1. The Awakening, your first day in hell. You wake up to the sound of artillery. Not in the distance. Close. So close that dirt rains down from the dugout ceiling onto your face. It's 4 a.m. You've been asleep for maybe 2 hours, curled up on a stretcher in a bunker that smells like gangrene, vomit, and wet earth. This is your bedroom, your operating theater, and your morgue, all compressed into a space roughly the size of a modern walk-in closet. The dugout is maybe 7 feet by 10 feet, reinforced with timber beams that creak ominously with each shell burst. There's no ventilation beyond the entrance, which is covered with a gas curtain that reeks of chemicals. The air is thick and soupy, filled with the breath of dying men and the sweet sick smell of infected wounds. Your eyes adjust to the dim glow of a single candle stuck in an empty rum jar. In the corner, 3 men lie on stretchers, waiting. One is unconscious. One is moaning softly. The third is quiet, which probably means he's already dead, but nobody's had time to move him yet. You stand up, and your head immediately connects with a support beam. Pain flares. You curse. Welcome to your morning routine for the foreseeable future. There's no coffee, obviously. No breakfast. No bathroom with running water. What you do have is a tin cup of water that tastes like chlorine and rust, and a biscuit so hard you could use it as a weapon. This is breakfast. Enjoy it because it might be the only meal you get today. Let's be clear about something right now. You are not a doctor. You're a medical orderly, maybe a stretcher bearer who showed a little bit of initiative or education. Real doctors exist, sure, but they're miles behind the lines in casualty clearing stations, working in converted schools or churches with actual surgical equipment. You've got bandages, some questionable morphine, a few rusty instruments, and your bare hands. Your job is to keep men alive long enough to get them to the real doctors. Your success rate is, charitably speaking, abysmal. The bombardment increases. The whole dugout shakes. Dust and dirt cascade from the ceiling. One of the timber supports groans. You genuinely cannot tell if this shelter is about to collapse or if this is just normal. Spoiler alert. This is normal. This is always normal. You will never get used to it, but you will learn to function through it, moving on muscle memory while your brain screams at you to run. Outside, you can hear the whistle of incoming shells, the crump of explosions, and underneath it all, the sound you'll hear in your nightmares for the rest of your life. Men screaming. Some are screaming for help. Some are screaming for their mothers. Some are just screaming because that's the only response left when your leg is attached to your body by a thread of muscle and you're lying in a shell crater filling with rainwater. Your first patient of the day gets carried in by 2 exhausted stretcher bearers. They drop him on the ground because there's no more room on the stretchers. The man is maybe 19 years old. His uniform is shredded. His left arm is gone at the elbow, the stump wrapped in a field dressing that's already soaked through with blood. But that's not the worst part. The worst part is his abdomen, where a piece of shrapnel roughly the size of your fist has opened him up like a zipper. Here's the thing nobody tells you about abdominal wounds. You can see everything. The intestines are right there, gray-pink and slithery, trying to push their way out through the opening. The smell is immediate and overpowering, a mixture of feces and blood and something acidic that makes your eyes water. The man is conscious. He's looking at you with eyes that understand exactly how bad this is. And here's your reality check for day one. This man is going to die. You know it. He knows it. The stretcher bearers know it. But you're going to try anyway because that's the job. You're going to pack his abdomen with gauze, knowing that even if he survives the next hour, infection will kill him in 3 days. You're going to give him morphine, except you're already running low and there are going to be 20 more men just like him before the day is over. You're going to smile at him and tell him he's going to be fine, and he's going to smile back because both of you are pretending. Want to take a moment to process that? Too bad. Another shell lands close enough to extinguish your candle. In the darkness, you hear more men being carried in. It's going to be a long day, and this is just the beginning. Chapter 2. The Regimental Aid Post, your Palace of Horrors. Let's talk about your workspace. The Regimental Aid Post, or RAP, is where you spend most of your time. It's typically a reinforced dugout, a shell-damaged building, or if you're really unlucky, just a sandbag trench covered with a tarpaulin. The one you're assigned to is actually on the better end of the spectrum. It's a former German bunker, captured 3 months ago and immediately repurposed. The main chamber is about 12 feet by 15 feet. The ceiling is maybe 6 feet high at the tallest point, which means you're constantly hunched over. The walls are lined with wooden supports that are already rotting from the constant dampness. The floor is bare earth, currently mud because everything is always mud. There's a wooden plank walkway down the center, but it's slick with blood and other fluids, so you learn quickly to walk on the sides. Your equipment is stored on shelves made from ammunition crates. Let's inventory what you have to work with, shall we? You've got approximately 200 field dressings, which sounds like a lot until you realize you can go through that in a single hour during a major offensive. You've got maybe 50 morphine syrettes, except half of them are probably expired and nobody's really sure about the dosage anymore. You've got some iodine for disinfection. You've got bandages. You've got splints made from wood and strips of cloth. You've got a few surgical instruments that were last properly sterilized sometime in 1914. And that's it. That's your entire medical arsenal. There's no X-ray machine, obviously. No blood typing, because that's barely been invented. No antibiotics, because penicillin won't be discovered for another 12 years. No 4 fluids. No plasma. No blood transfusions except in the most primitive sense, and those usually kill the patient anyway because, again, no blood typing. You're practicing medicine with tools that would have been considered inadequate in the Napoleonic era. The lighting is a constant nightmare. During the day, you might get some natural light from the entrance, filtered through the gas curtain. At night, you're working by candlelight, or if you're lucky, a kerosene lamp that fills the bunker with fumes and makes everyone's eyes water. You'll perform surgery by candlelight. You'll dig shrapnel out of men's chests by candlelight. You'll amputate limbs by candlelight. The shadows make everything harder, and the flickering light plays tricks on your eyes, making you question whether that's a piece of bone you're looking at or just a fragment of cloth embedded in the wound. There's no running water. Your water supply consists of whatever can be hauled up in jerry cans from the nearest well, assuming the well hasn't been contaminated by corpses or gas. This water is for drinking first, medical use second. You'll clean wounds with water that you wouldn't use to wash your car in 2026. You'll rinse surgical instruments in water that's probably giving everyone typhoid. You'll wash your hands in water that's more bacteria than H2O. Temperature control is a joke. In summer, the bunker becomes an oven, trapping heat and amplifying every smell. In winter, it's barely warmer than outside, which means you're trying to perform delicate medical procedures while your fingers are numb and your patients are shivering so hard they can't hold still. There's no heating system beyond a small brazier in the corner that produces more smoke than warmth. The smell is something you need to understand viscerally to appreciate fully. It's a layered horror. At the base level, you've got the earth smell, damp and moldy. Then you add unwashed bodies because nobody's had a proper bath in weeks. Then you add blood, which has a coppery sweetness that coats the back of your throat. Then you add infected wounds, which smell like death and rot and something sour that makes you gag. Then you add gangrenous tissue, which smells like nothing else in the world. A wet decay that seems to have weight and texture in the air. Then you add feces and urine because men with abdominal wounds lose control of their bowels, and men who've been lying in shell holes for hours are already soiled. Then you add vomit because pain and fear make men sick. Then you add chemicals, iodine and chlorine and whatever's in the gas curtains. Mix it all together, let it ferment in an enclosed space with poor ventilation, and you have the signature scent of a regimental aid post. This smell will become your normal. It will seep into your clothes, your hair, your skin. You'll smell it when you eat. You'll smell it when you try to sleep. You'll smell it for years after the war, triggered by random things. A hospital corridor, a butcher shop, earth after rain. Veterans will tell you they can still smell it decades later. A ghost that never quite leaves. The soundscape is equally relentless. Even when there's no bombardment, there's noise. Men moaning, men crying, men praying in half a dozen languages. The wet sound of blood dripping onto the floor. The scrape of stretchers being moved. The rasp of your own breathing. And then, cutting through it all, the sounds you learn to dread. The whistle of incoming shells, the gasp that means a man's lung has been punctured, the rattle that means someone's drowning in their own blood. Here's what a typical RAP layout looks like. You've got the main treatment area in the center. Along one wall, you've got storage for equipment and supplies. Along another wall, you've got space for men waiting to be evacuated, assuming they're stable enough to wait. In the corner, covered with a tarp, you've got the bodies of men who didn't make it, waiting for the burial detail. There's no separate morgue. The dead share space with the living. You step over corpses to get to patients. This is normal. And here's the wildest part. This bunker, this hole in the ground that smells like an abattoir and shakes every time a shell lands within 100 yards. This is considered a relatively safe posting. You're not in the frontline trenches. You're not going over the top. You're theoretically in a protected position. But tell that to the medics who get killed by direct hits. Tell that to the aid posts that take a shell right through the roof and cease to exist in a spray of wood, earth, and body parts. Tell that to yourself when the walls start to cave in and you realize you're about to be buried alive with your patients. Want to go home yet? We haven't even gotten to the actual medicine part. This is just your office, your workspace, your home for the next however many months or years you manage to survive. Get comfortable, or don't. It doesn't matter. You're here now, and there's no leaving until this war ends or you end, whichever comes first. Chapter 3. The wounded arrive triage in the meat grinder. The whistle blows. You hear it clearly even through the artillery barrage. That means they've gone over the top. That means in approximately 10 to 30 minutes, depending on how badly the attack goes, you're going to be overwhelmed with casualties. You take a breath. You check your supplies one more time. You wait. The first ones always arrive faster than you expect. 2 stretcher bearers stumble in, bent double under the weight of their burden. They drop the stretcher on the ground and immediately leave to get another one. No words exchanged. No information about the patient. You're on your own to figure out what's wrong and how to fix it. This is triage. This is where you make impossible decisions with incomplete information and no time to think. The man on the stretcher in front of you is unconscious. His breathing is shallow and bubbly, which means lung damage. His left leg is bent at an angle that legs don't naturally bend, which means fracture. His uniform is dark with blood, but you can't immediately see where it's all coming from. You've got maybe 2 minutes to assess him before the next patient arrives. Here's how triage works in World War I. You've got 3 categories. The first category is men who will probably survive with immediate treatment. The second category is men who will probably survive even if treatment is delayed. The third category is men who probably won't survive no matter what you do. Your job is to spend your limited time and resources on categories 1 and 2. Category 3 gets morphine if you have it, a kind word if you have time, and then you move on. The problem is that these categories aren't always clear. That man with the sucking chest wound? Maybe he's category 1, maybe he's category 3. You won't know until you start treating him and see if he responds. That man with the abdominal injury? Statistically, he's category 3, but maybe his injuries look worse than they are. How much time do you gamble on a maybe? Here's the brutal mathematics of frontline medicine. If you spend 30 minutes trying to save one man who has a 10% chance of survival, that's 30 minutes you're not spending on 3 men who each have an 80% chance of survival. So what do? You let the first man die. You give him morphine, you hold his hand if you can spare 10 seconds, and then you move to the next patient. This is not medicine. This is arithmetic with human lives. The stretcher bearers keep coming. 2 men carrying another man between them. For men struggling with a soldier who's thrashing and screaming. A walking wounded who stumbles in under his own power. 1 hand pressed against a stomach wound. They keep coming. They don't stop coming. You develop a system because you have to. Quick scan of the patient head to toe. Check for massive bleeding first because you can actually do something about that. Check for breathing difficulties second. Check for obvious fractures third. Everything else is tertiary. You've got maybe 30 seconds per patient for this initial assessment. 30 seconds to decide who lives and who dies. The man with the chest wound gets a field dressing slapped over the wound to create a seal. Not perfect, but it might keep air from filling his chest cavity and collapsing his lung. Move to the next patient. This one has a head wound, blood sheeting down his face. Head wounds bleed like crazy but aren't always fatal. Quick check. Is his skull intact? Can he respond to questions? Pupils the same size? Bandage him up. Mark him for evacuation. Next patient. Here's a man with both legs shattered below the knee. The bones are visible through the torn flesh, white shards poking through red meat. He's conscious. He's screaming. You give him morphine, splint both legs with whatever you can find, and mark him for immediate evacuation. He might lose both legs, but he'll probably live. Next patient. This one is unconscious with a piece of shrapnel embedded in his throat. You can see it, a jagged piece of metal about the size of your thumb, lodged just to the left of his windpipe. He's still breathing, which means it hasn't severed anything immediately vital, but if you try to remove it here, you might kill him. If you leave it in, he might bleed out before he gets to a proper hospital. You make a decision. Leave it in, bandage around it, mark for urgent evacuation. Next patient. The walking wounded man has finally made it to you. He's been standing there, patient and quiet, waiting his turn while you work on men who look worse off. When you finally get to him and pull his hand away from his stomach, his intestines start to slide out through the wound. He looks down at them, looks up at you, and asks very calmly if he's going to be okay. You tell him yes while you pack his abdomen with gauze, knowing he has maybe hours before peritonitis kills him. Next patient. They keep coming. A man with his jaw shot off, gurgling and drowning in his own blood. You roll him on his side so the blood can drain out instead of down his throat. A man with his arm hanging by threads. You do the fastest amputation of your life, more hacking than surgery, while he screams through the leather strap you've jammed between his teeth. A man whose entire back is peppered with shrapnel. You pick out what you can easily reach and leave the rest, because digging for every fragment would take hours you don't have. Here's what nobody tells you about mass casualty situations. You stop seeing them as people. You can't. If you see them as people, you'll freeze, you'll break down, you'll become useless. So they become problems to solve. This is a pneumothorax problem. This is a hemorrhage problem. This is a fracture problem. You fix what you can, stabilize what you can't, and move to the next problem. But then something breaks through. A boy, and he is a boy, maybe 17, grabs your arm and asks you to write a letter to his mother. His legs are gone. Both of them. Gone at the hips, and you can see the shattered pelvis. He's category 3 and he knows it. You don't have time. You have 10 other patients who need you. But he's looking at you with eyes that are already glazing over. And you stop. For 90 seconds, you stop. You grab a scrap of paper. You take down his mother's address. You promise him you'll write. You lie and tell him he's going to see her again. He smiles. He dies before you finish the next patient. The wave of casualties starts to slow. You've processed maybe 40 men in 2 hours. Your hands are covered in blood up to the elbows. Your uniform is soaked. The floor of the aid post is slick with fluids. The living are packed shoulder to shoulder, waiting for transport. The dead are stacked in the corner, covered with whatever scraps of cloth you could find. You have no idea how many you saved. You have no idea how many you could have saved if you'd made different choices. And here's the thing that will haunt you. Somewhere in that pile of men you triaged, somewhere in those split-second decisions, you got one wrong. You marked a man as Category 3 who might have survived with treatment. Or you spent time on a man who was doomed anyway while another man bled out waiting. You'll never know which decision it was. You'll never know who you could have saved. This uncertainty will eat at you for the rest of your life. The bombardment has stopped. The attack is over. You have maybe an hour before the wounded from the counterattack start arriving. You use this time to resupply what you can, to move bodies, to grab something to eat if your stomach can handle it. Can't usually, but you force it down anyway because you need the energy. Then you wait, because they're always coming. The wounded are always coming. And you'll always be here, making impossible choices in impossible conditions, trying to save men who are too broken to save. Welcome to triage. Welcome to playing God with nothing but your instincts and a stopwatch you don't have. And if you think this is the worst of it, just wait. We haven't even talked about surgery yet. Chapter 4. The Surgical Nightmare. Operations by Candlelight. Alright, so you've managed to stabilize the most critical cases and send them back to the casualty clearing station. But sometimes transport isn't available. Sometimes the roads are under bombardment. Sometimes a man is too unstable to move even 200 yards, let alone the 5 or 10 miles to the CCS. Sometimes you have no choice but to operate right here, right now, in your dugout with your inadequate tools and your inadequate training. Let's talk about what surgery looks like in a regimental aid post. First, forget everything you think you know about modern surgery. There's no operating room with sterile white tiles and bright lights. There's no surgical team of specialists. There's no anesthesiologist monitoring vital signs. There's no backup plan. There's just you, a wooden plank across 2 ammunition crates that serves as your operating table, and a patient who's probably going to die no matter what you do. Your surgical instruments are stored in a metal box. Let's see what you're working with. You've got a scalpel that hasn't been properly sharpened in months. You've got a bone saw that's rusty around the edges. You've got forceps, several pairs, all of them slightly bent from being dropped or used for purposes they weren't designed for. You've got surgical needles and catgut for sutures. You've got clamps that stick sometimes and don't stick when they should. You've got a tourniquet. You've got your hands. Sterilization is theoretical at best. Proper sterilization requires an autoclave or at least boiling water for an extended period. You have neither the equipment nor the time for that. What you do is rinse your instruments in whatever clean water you have, maybe run them through a flame if you have a few extra seconds, and hope for the best. Sometimes you literally wipe blood off the scalpel with a rag between patients. This is not medical best practice. This is wartime improvisation, and it kills almost as many men as the enemy does. Let's say you've got a patient with a shattered arm. The bone is broken in multiple places. The flesh is torn. You can see foreign material embedded in the wound. Dirt, cloth fragments, pieces of metal. In a modern hospital, this would be a multi-hour operation with orthopedic specialists and hardware and careful reconstruction. Here, you've got 2 choices. Try to save the arm or amputate it. Trying to save the arm means cleaning the wound, removing all foreign material, setting the bone as best you can, and hoping infection doesn't set in. The odds are not in your favor. Even minor wounds regularly become infected in these conditions. A wound this extensive, you're almost guaranteeing gangrene. And when gangrene sets in, you'll have to amputate anyway, except now the infection has spread up the limb and you're taking the arm off at the shoulder instead of the elbow. So you amputate. You give the patient morphine, though you're running low, so it's not quite enough to fully kill the pain. In an ideal world, you'd have chloroform or ether for anesthesia. In your world, you have morphine, maybe a swig of rum if you're lucky, and a leather strap for the patient to bite down on. The patient is conscious. He's going to feel this. You place the tourniquet above the elbow, tighten it until the blood flow stops. You mark where you're going to cut with your finger, feeling for the right spot between bones. You pick up the scalpel. Your hands are shaking slightly, but that's normal. Your hands are always shaking now. You make the first incision, cutting through skin and muscle in a circular pattern around the arm. The patient screams. The leather strap muffles it somewhat, but you can still hear it clearly, and you'll hear it in your nightmares tonight and every night after. You keep cutting. You have to cut through all the soft tissue before you can get to the bone. Blood wells up despite the tourniquet. You mop it away with a rag that's already stiff with dried blood from previous surgeries. You reach bone. You pick up the saw. This is the worst part. The bone saw is designed to cut through bone, obviously, but it's not elegant. It's brutal. You place the saw blade against the bone and start sawing. The sound is horrible. A grinding, scraping sound that seems to resonate in your teeth. The vibration travels up the saw, into your hands, up your arms. The patient is thrashing now, held down by whoever you could grab to assist you. Usually it's a stretcher bearer, someone with strong hands and a strong stomach. You saw through the bone. Takes longer than you'd expect. Bone is tough, especially in young men who've been doing hard physical labor all their lives. Your arm muscles burn. Sweat drips into your eyes. The candle gutters in a draft. You keep sawing. Finally, the bone separates. The arm comes free. You drop it on the floor because there's nowhere else to put it. It'll join the pile of amputated limbs in the corner, waiting to be burned or buried. Now you have to tie off the blood vessels. This is delicate work, and you're doing it by candlelight with shaking hands while the patient moans and the ground shakes from artillery. You use the forceps to grab each severed vessel, pull it out slightly, tie it off with catgut. There are dozens of vessels. You miss one and blood spurts out, pulsing with the patient's heartbeat. You grab it, tie it off. You miss another one. Grab, tie, move on. Finally, the bleeding is controlled. Now you fold the skin flap over the stump, trimming away excess tissue to create a clean closure. You suture it shut with more catgut, making rough stitches that would make a peacetime surgeon wince. But the stitches hold, and that's what matters. You wrap the stump in a bandage. You loosen the tourniquet to make sure you got all the bleeders. Blood seeps through the bandage immediately, but not too fast. That's acceptable. You mark the patient for evacuation and move him off your makeshift operating table. The whole operation took maybe 20 minutes. In those 20 minutes, you saved this man's life. You also guaranteed he'll never have two arms again. He's 19 years old. He'll spend the next 60 years of his life learning to do everything with one hand. But he's alive, which is more than can be said for a lot of men who come through your aid post. That's a relatively straightforward amputation. Now let's talk about the complicated ones. Abdominal surgery. A man comes in with a shell fragment embedded in his abdomen. This hits something vital. You can tell by the way his belly is distended and hard. He's bleeding internally. In a modern hospital, this would be a major operation with a full surgical team and hours of careful work. Here, you're going to open him up and try to figure out what's broken while he lies on a plank across two ammunition crates. You make an incision. The smell that comes out is indescribable. Feces, blood, bile, stomach acid, all mixed together and fermenting inside a living human body. You fight down the urge to vomit. You keep cutting. You need to get inside and find the source of the bleeding. His intestines are right there, gray and slippery. You push them aside, trying to find the hemorrhage. There's so much blood it's hard to see anything. You're working by feel as much as by sight, your fingers probing through hot, slippery tissue, searching for the damage. You find it. The shrapnel has nicked the mesenteric artery. Blood is pumping out with every heartbeat. You need to clamp the artery and tie it off. Simple in theory. In practice, you're trying to grab a slippery blood vessel with forceps that don't grip properly while working by candlelight in a dugout that's shaking from artillery strikes. You get the clamp on. It slips off. Blood spurts in your face. You wipe your eyes and try again. This time it holds. You tie off the vessel. The bleeding slows. But here's the problem. While you were dealing with that, the patient has been lying open on the table. His intestines have been exposed to the air of this bunker, which is full of bacteria and God knows what else. Even if you close him up perfectly, infection is almost certain. And you can't close him up perfectly because you don't have the right equipment or the right conditions. You do your best. You rinse the wound with saline solution. You tuck everything back inside. You suture the abdomen shut. You bandage it. You give him morphine for the pain. You mark him for immediate evacuation. He'll probably die in 3 days from peritonitis. But there's a chance, a small chance, that he might survive. And that's the best you can offer. This is surgery in a regimental aid post. This is what cutting-edge battlefield medicine looks like in 1916. You're using techniques that would be considered malpractice in any civilian hospital, but out here, it's the best anyone can do. You're a butcher with good intentions, hacking away at human flesh, trying to keep people alive long enough to get them to someone with better tools and better training. And the worst part? You're good at it now. You've done so many amputations that you can finish one in under 15 minutes. You've opened so many abdomens that you can navigate by feel. You've tied off so many blood vessels that your fingers move automatically, muscle memory taking over while your mind retreats somewhere safer. You've become efficient at emergency butchery, and the fact that you're good at this horrible thing is somehow more disturbing than the thing itself. Your hands are covered in blood. Your apron is stiff with it. The floor is slick with it. The pile of amputated limbs in the corner grows higher every day. This is your life now. This is your job. And tomorrow you'll do it all again. Chapter 5. The supplies that don't exist. Inventory of inadequacy. You need morphine. Desperately. Your supply is down to maybe a dozen syrettes, and you've got 20 men who need pain relief right now. You send a runner back to the advanced dressing station to request more. The runner returns 3 hours later with a message. They're out too. Try again tomorrow. Meanwhile, you've got men screaming in agony, and all you can do is apologize. Let's talk about the supply situation, because it's a nightmare that never ends. In theory, there's a whole supply chain designed to keep frontline medical personnel equipped with what they need. In practice, this supply chain is constantly breaking down, getting blown up, getting lost, or simply running out. The morphine shortage is chronic. Morphine is the only effective painkiller you have, and the demand is infinite. Every wounded man needs it. Some need it multiple times. A man with a shattered femur might need a dose every 4 hours just to stay conscious. A man waiting for evacuation with an abdominal wound might need steady doses for days. A man dying of gas exposure might need it right up until the moment he stops breathing. You're supposed to have enough. You never have enough. What you do have is a stack of empty morphine syrettes in a box, because you're supposed to send them back for accounting purposes. Someone, somewhere behind the lines, is tracking morphine usage. They want to make sure it's not being diverted to the black market or used recreationally. So you have to prove you actually used what you were issued. This means in the middle of a mass casualty situation, you're supposed to be collecting empty syrettes and filing paperwork. It's absurd. You do it anyway when you remember, because the alternative is getting your already inadequate supply cut even further. Bandages are another constant shortage. You're supposed to have several types. Field dressings for immediate use, larger bandages for wrapping limbs, specialized dressings for chest wounds. What you actually have is a pile of cotton gauze and some adhesive tape that barely sticks in the damp. You make do. You cut bandages to size. You reuse them when you can, washing them in boiled water and hoping the sterilization process actually worked. Men die from infected wounds because their bandages were contaminated. But what choice do you have? Splints for broken bones are supposed to be manufactured items, shaped and padded for specific injuries. What you have is a pile of wooden slats that might have started life as ammunition crate parts. You pad them with whatever cloth you can find. You tie them in place with strips of torn uniform. It works usually, but men end up with limbs set improperly, bones healing at wrong angles, chronic pain for the rest of their lives. Better than dying barely. Surgical instruments are supposed to be replaced regularly. Scalpels dull. Saws get bent. Forceps lose their grip. In a well-supplied hospital, you'd swap out worn instruments for new ones. Here, you've been using the same scalpel for 6 months. You sharpen it yourself when you can, honing the edge against a rock or a file. The bone saw is bent at an angle because it got stepped on during a shelling, but it still cuts, so you keep using it. Antiseptics are critical for preventing infection. Iodine is the main one you have access to. It stings like fire, but it works, usually. The problem is that your supply of iodine comes in bottles that are constantly breaking or getting lost or just running out. You're supposed to paint every wound with iodine before bandaging. In reality, you've got maybe enough to do 1 wound in 5. You prioritize the worst injuries and hope the minor ones heal on their own. Saline solution for irrigation is something you're supposed to have in unlimited quantities. It's just salt water after all. The problem is getting clean water to make it with. The water supply at the front is contaminated with everything from dirt to decomposing corpses. You boil what you can, but fuel for boiling is scarce and the process takes time you don't have. So you use water that's questionable at best, poisonous at worst, and you watch men develop infections from wounds you tried to clean. Anesthetics beyond morphine are basically non-existent at your level. Chloroform exists in theory. Ether exists in theory. In practice, these are reserved for proper hospitals miles behind the lines. You're doing surgery with nothing but morphine, and not enough of that. Men are conscious for amputations. They feel everything. They remember everything. The psychological damage from that alone is incalculable. Blood for transfusions is starting to be a thing, but the process is primitive and dangerous. Blood typing is brand new science. The tests are unreliable. A direct transfusion requires finding a donor, hooking them up to the recipient through a tube, and hoping their blood is compatible. More often than not, it's not, and you've just killed a man by giving him the wrong blood type. So you don't do transfusions unless there's absolutely no other option, and even then, you're gambling. Food for medical personnel is whatever's left over after the fighting troops have been fed, which means you're subsisting on the same iron rations as everyone else. Hardtack biscuits that can break teeth, tinned beef that's more fat than meat, tea that tastes like dirt. You need calories to keep functioning through 12-hour shifts of trauma surgery. You're not getting them. You lose weight. Your hands shake from malnutrition. Your thinking gets foggy. But the wounded keep coming, so you keep working. Water for drinking is rationed strictly. You get maybe 1 liter per day, and that has to cover drinking, washing, and any medical use. It's never enough. You're constantly thirsty. Your mouth is dry. Your tongue sticks to your teeth. Dehydration makes everything harder, but there's no getting more water unless it rains. And even then, collecting rainwater in shell-torn terrain is its own challenge. Lighting is a constant problem. Candles get used up. Oil for lamps runs out. You're performing surgery in near darkness, working by feel and instinct as much as by sight. You've asked for more candles, more lamp oil, better lighting equipment. The request goes in. Nothing comes back. So you work in the dark and you make mistakes you wouldn't make if you could see clearly. Clothing for yourself is whatever you were issued at the beginning, plus whatever you can scrounge. Your uniform is torn, stained, falling apart. Your boots are worn through. You've got no spare socks, so when your current pair develops holes, you just keep wearing them until your feet are bloody. You've asked for replacements. Everyone has. The supply chain is overwhelmed. The truly maddening thing is that all this stuff exists. Somewhere back behind the lines, there are warehouses full of morphine and bandages and instruments and everything else you need. It's just not getting to you. The roads are under bombardment. The supply trucks are commandeered for ammunition. The bureaucracy is Byzantine. Your requests get lost or denied or simply ignored. Meanwhile, you're improvising. You're tearing up your own shirts for bandages. You're using rum as an antiseptic because you're out of iodine. You're fashioning splints from broken rifle stocks. You're performing surgery with a knife you borrowed from the cook tent because your scalpel finally broke. This is modern military medicine. Equal parts skill, desperation, and sheer stubborn refusal to give up. And here's the darkest irony. Even if you had unlimited supplies, it wouldn't save everyone. The injuries are too severe. The medical knowledge doesn't exist yet. The conditions are too harsh. But having adequate supplies would save some. Some men who die from infection might survive with proper antiseptics. Some men who die from shock might survive with blood transfusions. Some men who die screaming in agony might at least die peacefully with morphine. But you don't have adequate supplies. You never will. So you watch men die who shouldn't have to die, killed not by their wounds but by the inadequacy of the medical system that's supposed to save them. And tomorrow you'll make the same requests again, and they'll be denied again, and you'll make do with what you have again until eventually you or the war gives out. Whichever comes first. Chapter 6. The stretcher bearers, your lifeline to hell. You hear them coming before you see them. The heavy breathing, the splash of boots in mud, the creak of wooden stretcher poles under too much weight. The stretcher bearers are arriving with another load of wounded. These men are the unsung heroes of the medical chain, and they're dying at rates that make frontline infantry look safe by comparison. Let's talk about what stretcher bearers actually do, because it's both simpler and more horrifying than you'd think. Their job is to retrieve wounded men from wherever they fall and carry them back to the regimental aid post. Sometimes that's 50 yards. Sometimes it's 300 yards. Sometimes it's through open ground under machine gun fire. Sometimes it's through mud so deep they sink to their thighs with every step. Sometimes it's through barbed wire. Sometimes it's at night with no lights because lights draw artillery. Always, it's carrying another human being who's in agony and probably bleeding on you. The standard stretcher is a canvas sheet stretched between two wooden poles. It weighs maybe 20 pounds empty. Add a wounded man, average weight 150 pounds, and you've got 170 pounds to carry between two men. That's 85 pounds per bearer, which doesn't sound terrible until you remember they're carrying this through conditions that make normal walking difficult. Now add the man's equipment. His rifle, his ammunition, his pack, all of which stays with him unless the stretcher bearers have time to strip it off, which they usually don't. Add another 40 pounds. Now they're carrying 105 pounds each. Through mud. Under fire. For distances that can stretch to half a mile or more. But wait, it gets worse. Because the wounded man is usually not lying still. He's screaming. He's thrashing. He's trying to grab onto the bearers for comfort. The stretcher shifts and tips. The bearers stumble. Sometimes they drop the stretcher and the wounded man crashes into the mud, and his injuries get worse and the bearers have to pick him back up and keep going. And they're doing this under fire. Stretcher bearers are technically protected under the Geneva Convention. They wear Red Cross armbands. They're not armed. In theory, they're not supposed to be targeted. In practice, machine gun fire doesn't discriminate. Artillery doesn't care about armbands. Snipers shoot at anything that moves. Stretcher bearers die constantly, and when they die, their patient usually dies too, trapped on a stretcher in no man's land, unable to move, waiting for the next shell. The ones who make it to your aid post are exhausted. They've been working non-stop since the attack began. They're covered in mud and blood. Some of it theirs, most of it from the men they've carried. They drop the stretcher on the ground, gasp out whatever information they have about the patient, and immediately turn around to go get another one. There's no rest. There's no break. As long as there are wounded men out there, the stretcher bearers keep going. You develop relationships with these men because you see them constantly. You learn their names. You learn which ones are reliable and which ones are struggling. You see them deteriorate over time, the physical toll adding up until they're broken shells of men, still carrying stretchers through sheer bloody-minded stubbornness. There's Jenkins, who's been doing this for 8 months. He's developed a tremor in his hands that never stops. He can't sleep anymore because every time he closes his eyes, he sees the men he couldn't save, the ones who died on his stretcher before he could get them back. But every morning, he picks up his stretcher and heads back into no man's land. There's O'Brien, who took a piece of shrapnel in the shoulder 3 weeks ago. It's still in there because the field surgeons decided it was too deep to remove without causing more damage. He can barely lift his left arm above his waist. He's still carrying stretchers, compensating by putting more weight on his right side, which is giving him chronic back pain that will plague him for the rest of his life. There's Miller, who's maybe 19, skinny as a rail, doesn't look strong enough to carry a full pack, let alone a wounded man. But he's been doing it for 6 months and he's somehow still alive. He never complains. He never hesitates. He just does the job. You've seen him carry men twice his size through mud and wire and fire, and somehow he always makes it back. Sometimes the stretcher bearers bring in men who are already dead. They don't know. They found a body, they put it on a stretcher, they carried it back. Only when they get to you do they discover the man died somewhere along the way. This happens more often than you'd think. It's not the bearer's fault. They don't have time to check thoroughly. They see a wounded man, they assume he needs help, they pick him up and go. Sometimes they bring in men who are dying and nothing can be done. Men with half their head missing, still technically alive, brainstem still functioning, but functionally already gone. Men with both legs severed at the hips. Men who've been lying in a shell hole for 2 days and are septic and delirious. These men should have been left in the field, categorized as hopeless, but the stretcher bearers brought them anyway because they can't just leave someone behind. You treat them as best you can, knowing it's futile, because to do otherwise would break the bearers who went through hell to save them. The bearers work in teams of 4, 2 on the stretcher, 2 ready to spell them. They rotate positions constantly because the physical strain is too much for anyone to endure continuously. But even with rotation, they're wrecked after a few hours. Their backs give out. Their shoulders seize up. Their hands develop blisters that burst and bleed and get infected. They keep going anyway. Night operations are the worst. No lights means navigating by memory and occasional star shells from the artillery. The shells light up no man's land in flickering snapshots. Mud, wire, craters, bodies. The stretcher bearers move in these brief moments of light, freezing when the darkness returns, trying to remember where the path was. Sometimes they walk into wire. Sometimes they fall into craters. Sometimes they step on a body that's half buried in the mud, and the sickening give under their boot will haunt them forever. You've seen bearers come back with wounds they didn't report because they didn't want to stop working. A gash on the arm from wire, wrapped with a filthy rag and forgotten. A twisted ankle that should be rested but is walked on for 12 more hours. A concussion from being blown off their feet by a shell burst, leaving them dizzy and nauseous but still functional enough to keep going. The death rate among stretcher bearers is staggering. Some estimates put it at 30 to 40% casualties in active periods. They're exposed to everything. Machine gun fire while crossing open ground, artillery while moving through contested areas, gas attacks when they can't drop everything to put on masks. And they can't fight back. They're unarmed. Their only defense is speed and luck runs out eventually. When a bearer dies, his body usually stays where it fell until the fighting dies down enough for someone to retrieve it. Sometimes that's days, sometimes weeks, sometimes never. There are stretcher bearers lying in no man's land right now, their bodies gradually sinking into the mud, lost and forgotten except by the men who worked alongside them. You depend on these men absolutely. Without stretcher bearers, wounded men stay in no man's land until they die. Without stretcher bearers, you have no patients to treat. The entire medical chain depends on these overlooked, underappreciated, constantly endangered men who do one of the most brutal jobs imaginable for no glory and minimal recognition. And they keep doing it. Day after day, attack after attack, they pick up their stretchers and head into hell to bring back one more man. They don't ask why. They don't hesitate. They don't quit. They just do the job until they die or the war ends. These are the men who make your work possible. These are the men who deserve monuments but will probably get footnotes. And every time they bring you another patient, you say thank you, and you mean it because you know what they risk to give you the chance to save a life. Chapter 7. Gas attacks. The invisible killer. You hear the shout first. Gas! 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 Panic floods through you instantly, a primal terror that overrides training. You scramble for your gas mask, that horrible rubber thing that smells of decay and chemicals. Your hands are shaking. You can't get it on fast enough. Every second counts. Every breath could be your last. Let's talk about gas, because it's the weapon that haunts your nightmares more than shells, more than bullets, more than anything else. Gas is insidious. It's invisible or nearly so. It's silent. It creeps into trenches and dugouts and shell holes. It settles in low areas where men take cover. And it kills in ways that are both medically fascinating and absolutely horrific. The Germans first used chlorine gas at Ypres in 1915. The British and French responded with their own chemical weapons. Now, in 1916, both sides are using gas regularly, and you're dealing with the casualties. Chlorine, phosgene, mustard gas. Each one has its own special horror, its own symptoms, its own method of killing. Chlorine gas smells like bleach, It's greenish-yellow in color, heavier than air, so it sinks into trenches. When men breathe it, it reacts with the moisture in their lungs to form hydrochloric acid. Imagine acid forming inside your lungs. That's what's happening. The lung tissue starts to dissolve. Fluid builds up. The men drown in their own bodily fluids while standing upright, gasping for air that won't come. You see a chlorine gas victim and you know immediately what happened. His face is blue-gray from oxygen deprivation. His eyes are streaming tears. He's coughing, a wet, horrible sound that brings up blood and mucus. His breathing is labored, wheezing, each breath a struggle. And there's nothing you can do. There's no treatment for chlorine gas exposure. None. You can give him oxygen if you have it, which you don't. You can prop him up to help him breathe easier. You can give him morphine for the pain and fear. But mostly, you watch him suffocate to death over the course of hours or days. His lungs are dissolving. Medical science in 1916 has no answer for this. Phosgene is worse. It smells like moldy hay or musty corn. It's a clear, colorless gas, almost impossible to detect until it's too late. The real horror of phosgene is that the symptoms are delayed. A man can breathe in a lethal dose, feel fine for hours, and then suddenly begin dying. Here's how it happens. The phosgene gets into the lungs and slowly starts to damage the alveoli, the tiny air sacs where gas exchange happens. This damage causes fluid to leak from the blood vessels into the lungs. But this process takes time. A man exposed to phosgene might feel short of breath. He might cough a little. He might think he got away with it. Then 6 hours later, he's drowning in pink frothy fluid that's filling his lungs faster than he can cough it out. You get men coming to you who were exposed to gas hours ago and seem fine. You're supposed to know, somehow, whether they got a lethal dose or just a whiff. There's no test. There's no way to tell. You keep them for observation and wait to see if they start dying. Some do, some don't. The uncertainty is maddening. Mustard gas is the most evil. It's not even a gas, technically. It's an aerosol, a mist of tiny oily droplets that sticks to everything it touches. It smells like garlic or mustard, hence the name, and it burns. Not immediately. That's the diabolical part. You can walk through a cloud of mustard gas and feel fine. Then a few hours later, the burning starts. Mustard gas causes chemical burns wherever it touches. Skin blisters and peels. I swell shut. Lungs develop massive blisters that burst and bleed. Men exposed to mustard gas don't just suffer from respiratory symptoms. They suffer from total systemic damage. Their skin falls off in sheets. They go blind. They cough up chunks of their own lung tissue. And this happens over days or weeks, a slow, agonizing deterioration. You can't treat mustard gas exposure. You can only manage symptoms. You remove contaminated clothing, which exposes you to the chemical. You wash the patient with water and soap if you have it. You bandage the blisters when they appear. You watch them scream in agony from burns that cover their entire body. You give morphine. You give more morphine. You keep giving morphine until they die or you run out. The worst part about gas casualties is that they're conscious for most of it. A man with a bullet wound might be in shock, his mind retreating from the pain. A man dying from gas is fully aware. He knows his lungs are filling with fluid. He knows he's suffocating. He knows he's going to die, and he knows it's going to take hours or days. The psychological torture of that is unimaginable. Gas masks are supposed to protect you, but they're imperfect. The early masks are just cotton pads soaked in sodium bicarbonate solution. They might filter out some chlorine if you're lucky. Against phosgene or mustard gas, they're basically useless. The newer masks, the ones with charcoal filters and rubber face pieces, are better. But they're uncomfortable, claustrophobic, and difficult to work in. Try performing surgery while wearing a gas mask. Your vision is limited to what you can see through fogged goggles. Your breathing is labored through the filter. Your hands are shaking from oxygen deprivation. You can't smell, which means you can't detect the usual warning signs of infection or gangrene. You're working blind, breathless, and terrified, because if your mask fails, you're going to end up as one of your own patients. Gas attacks don't just create casualties. They create chaos. When the gas alarm sounds, Everything stops. Surgery halts. Triage stops. Everyone scrambles for masks. Wounded men who can't put on their own masks suffocate, sometimes right in front of you while you're struggling with your own equipment. Men who are unconscious die. Men who are too injured to seal their masks properly die. And you can't help them because if you break your own seal to assist, you'll die too. The aid post becomes a death trap during a gas attack. The dugout, which provides protection from shells, becomes a chamber where gas settles and concentrates. Ventilation is poor. The gas curtain over the entrance is supposed to help, but it's just cloth soaked in chemicals. It slows the gas down. It doesn't stop it. Men huddle in the dugout, masks on, breathing through filters, waiting for the all-clear signal that might not come for hours. And then there are the men who panic, who can't handle the claustrophobia of the mask, who rip it off despite the gas still being present. You watch them do it. You scream at them to put it back on. They breathe in gas and start choking immediately. You can't help them. You can't even touch them without contaminating yourself. So you watch them die 6 feet away from you, drowning in their own dissolved lungs, while you stand there breathing through a charcoal filter. After a gas attack, the cleanup is nightmarish. Everything is contaminated. Clothing, equipment, the ground itself. Mustard gas can remain active for days, lurking in puddles, soaked into wood and cloth, waiting for someone to touch it. You have to handle contaminated men with bare hands because you don't have gloves. The chemical soaks into your skin. You'll develop burns later, minor ones if you're lucky, severe ones if you're not. The long-term effects of gas exposure are still being documented. Men survive the initial attack but develop chronic breathing problems. Bronchitis that never goes away. Scarred lungs that can't process oxygen efficiently. Blindness from eye damage. Skin that's permanently sensitive to sunlight. These men will live with the consequences of gas exposure for the rest of their lives, however long that turns out to be. Gas warfare is condemned as inhumane by pretty much everyone who's experienced it. It's indiscriminate. It's agonizing. Provides no quick death, no clean death. It's torture weaponized, suffering as strategy. And yet both sides keep using it, keep developing new types, keep searching for the perfect chemical weapon that will finally break the stalemate. You deal with the aftermath. The burned men, the blinded men, the men coughing up pieces of their own lungs. And you have nothing to offer them but sympathy and morphine. That's the reality of gas warfare from the medical perspective. You're not treating patients, you're witnessing torture victims, and you're helpless to do anything but ease their path to death. Welcome to chemical warfare. Welcome to the future of killing. And if you think this is as bad as it gets, just wait. We haven't even touched on trench foot yet. Chapter 8. Trench foot and rot. The slow decay. You smell him before you see him. That sick sweet stench of rotting flesh mixed with the smell of wet wool and old sweat. A private is brought in, unable to walk, carried by 2 of his mates. They drop him on the ground and back away quickly, trying not to breathe through their noses. You don't blame them. The smell is overwhelming. You already know what this is before you look. Trench foot, the plague of the Western Front. The enemy that kills more men than gas in some sectors. The utterly preventable condition that ruins thousands of soldiers because the basic requirement, keeping feet dry, is impossible in a waterlogged trench system. You kneel next to the private. He's maybe 20. He's been crying, you can tell from his face. He knows what's coming. You unlace his boots carefully. The leather is stiff with dried mud and damp. You pull the boot off. The smell intensifies. His sock is black with filth and stuck to his skin. You peel it away gently. What you reveal makes your stomach turn. His foot is swollen to twice its normal size. The skin is a mottled purple-black, blistered in places, splitting in others. You can see the tissue underneath, gray and necrotic. When you press gently on the arch, your finger sinks into softness that shouldn't be there. The flesh is literally rotting while he's still alive. Trench foot happens when feet are wet and cold for extended periods. Days, weeks. The constant moisture causes the blood vessels to constrict. Tissue dies from lack of oxygen. Bacteria move in and begin feeding on the dead tissue. the infection spreads. Without treatment, it leads to gangrene. With treatment, it often still leads to gangrene. The private is whimpering. "Can you save it, doc?" he asks, even though you're not a doctor. Even though he can smell his own foot rotting. Even though he knows the answer. You examine both feet. The right one is worse than the left, but the left isn't much better. Both are swollen, discolored, blistered. When you try to move his toes, he screams. Some of the toes don't move at all. They're already dead, black with necrosis, hard to the touch. Here's what you're supposed to do for trench foot. Remove the patient from the wet environment. Wash and dry the feet thoroughly. Warm them gradually. Elevate them. Apply dressings. Wait and hope the tissue recovers. This works for early-stage trench foot. For this is too far gone. The toes on his right foot are black halfway to the ball. That tissue is dead. It's not coming back. You need to amputate before the infection spreads up his leg. But you're in a regimental aid post, not a surgical theater. You don't have the facilities for a proper amputation. You don't have the time. You mark him for immediate evacuation and hope he makes it to a casualty clearing station before gangrene takes the whole foot. But here's the problem. There are 20 men waiting to be evacuated. Transport is backed up. The roads are under bombardment. This private might wait here for hours or days. And with every hour, the infection spreads. You can see the red streaks starting to climb up his ankle. That's blood poisoning. That's the infection entering his bloodstream. If it reaches his heart, he's dead. You make a decision. You're going to amputate the worst toes right here, right now. It's a field expedient measure, not proper surgery, but it might buy him time. You explain this to the private. He nods. He understands. He's seen enough trench foot cases to know how this goes. You don't have anesthesia beyond morphine, and your supply is critically low. You give him half a syringe, which won't be nearly enough. You give him a leather strap to bite down on. You position him so his buddies can hold him down. You gather your instruments. A scalpel, a bone cutter, forceps, catgut for sutures. You work quickly. The first toe is already mostly detached, held on by a thread of blackened tissue. You cut through it and it comes away in your hand, a dead thing surprisingly heavy. You drop it on the floor. The second toe requires more work. You cut through the skin, through the ligaments, through the bone. The private is screaming through the leather strap, thrashing against the men holding him down. Blood wells up, surprisingly bright red against the necrotic black of his foot. You tie off blood vessels. You trim away dead tissue, cutting back to something that looks marginally healthy. You can't tell for sure. The line between living and dead tissue is blurred, gangrenous flesh blending gradually into flesh that might survive. You cut conservatively, taking only what's obviously dead, hoping you've cut enough. You move to the next toe, and the next. You remove 4 toes from his right foot, 3 from his left. The floor around you is littered with amputated digits. The smell is indescribable. The private has passed out from pain and shock, which is a mercy. You work faster now that he's not moving. You finish. You bandage both feet in gauze soaked with iodine solution. You elevate his legs on a pile of sandbags. You inject the rest of the morphine into his arm. You mark him for urgent evacuation. You move to the next patient. That private will probably lose both feet. The infection is too advanced. The tissue damage is too extensive. He'll spend the rest of his life on crutches or in a wheelchair. He's 20 years old. But he'll live, probably, which is more than can be said for a lot of men. Trench foot is entirely preventable. Change socks daily. Dry feet whenever possible. Rub them with whale oil to create a waterproof barrier. Rotate men out of the trenches regularly. These are the prevention measures. None of them happen consistently because the demands of war override the demands of health. Socks are in short supply. Men wear the same pair for weeks. Whale oil exists but doesn't make it to the front lines reliably. Rotating men out of trenches is impossible when you're holding a line against constant attack. So men stand in water, sometimes thigh-deep, for days on end, and their feet rot inside their boots. Officers can be court-martialed for allowing their men to develop trench foot. is considered a preventable condition, a sign of poor leadership. This leads to a perverse incentive structure where men with early-stage trench foot hide their symptoms, keep marching, keep fighting, until the damage is irreversible. They're more afraid of being accused of malingering than they are of losing their feet. You see the spectrum of trench foot constantly. Early stage. Feet are white and numb, wrinkled like they've been in the bath too long. This is usually reversible with warmth and dryness. Middle stage. Blisters form, skin starts to peel, pain sets in as blood flow returns. This might be reversible but often causes long-term damage. Late stage. What you just saw with the private tissue death, gangrene, amputation. The worst cases are the ones where gangrene has already spread beyond the foot. You see men with blackened legs up to the knee, the tissue dead and reeking, maggots already feeding on the necrotic flesh. These men need immediate amputation at the thigh to have any chance of survival. You can't do that here. You mark them for evacuation and pray they survive the journey. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they die in transit, the infection overwhelming their system. Sometimes they make it to a CCS, but the surgeon takes one look and decides they're too far gone. Sometimes they survive the amputation but die from shock or subsequent infection. Trench foot has a surprisingly high mortality rate for something that starts as just wet feet. And the cruel irony is that this is preventable. This is not artillery. This is not gas. This is not bullets. This is just water and cold and bacteria. This is something that proper equipment and proper rotation and proper foot care could eliminate entirely. But those things require resources and organization and a military command that prioritizes soldier health over operational demands. Good luck with that. You'll see hundreds of trench foot cases in your time here. You'll amputate hundreds of toes. You'll watch dozens of men lose feet, legs, lives. And the whole time you'll know that this didn't have to happen. That's the part that eats at you. The preventable suffering. The unnecessary amputations. The lives ruined by something as mundane as wet socks. Welcome to trench foot. Welcome to the reality that sometimes the biggest killer isn't the enemy across no man's land, but the water you're standing in. And tomorrow, more men will come in with blackened feet and desperate eyes, asking if you can save them, and you'll have to tell them the truth, which is that you can try, but the feet are already dead, and the best you can do is make sure the rot doesn't spread far enough to kill the rest of them too. Chapter 9. The food situation, iron rations and starvation. Your stomach is cramping with hunger. Again, always. You can't remember the last time you felt actually full. The breakfast you choked down 6 hours ago, if that stale biscuit and thin tea can be called breakfast, is long gone. Your next meal, if it arrives, won't be for another 3 hours. Maybe longer if the supply route is under fire, which it usually is. Let's talk about food because it's another front in the battle for survival, and it's one you're losing constantly. The official ration for a British soldier on the Western Front is supposed to provide about 4,000 calories per day. That's actually generous by historical standards. The problem is that the official ration and the actual ration are two very different things. On paper, you get fresh meat, bread, vegetables, tea, sugar, jam. In reality, you get tinned corned beef that's more fat than meat, hardtack biscuits that could double as construction material, and whatever vegetables manage to survive the journey to the front, which usually means nothing. Fresh bread is a fantasy. Fresh meat is something that happens miles behind the lines. The hardtack biscuit is your staple food. It's basically flour and water baked into a brick that's designed to last indefinitely. And it does last. These biscuits are probably left over from the Boer War. They're so hard you can't bite them without risking broken teeth. The standard procedure is to soak them in tea or water until they soften enough to eat. Even then, they have the texture of wet cardboard and taste like dust. But wait, it gets better. The biscuits are often infested with weevils, little beetles that burrow into the hardtack and lay eggs. You break open a biscuit and insects pour out. The official line is to just knock out the weevils and eat the biscuit anyway. The unofficial reality is that you're eating bugs with every bite and you've learned not to think about it too hard. Extra protein, right? Tinned corned beef, known universally as bully beef, is the other staple. It comes in cans that require a special key to open, except the keys are always lost, so you open the cans with your bayonet or whatever sharp implement you can find. The beef inside is a mystery meat situation. It's salty, it's fatty, it's vaguely meat-flavored. It's been in that can for years, preserved by salt and sealed air. You eat it cold because there's often no way to heat it. Sometimes you get McConaughey's rations, named after the company that produces them. These are tin stews supposedly containing meat and vegetables. The meat is dubious. The vegetables are identifiable only by texture, having been boiled into gray mush. You heat the tin over a small fire when you can, eating the lukewarm sludge directly from the can with a spoon that you haven't properly cleaned in weeks. Tea is the one constant. It's stewed strong and sweet, heavy with sugar when sugar is available. The tea itself is often more dust than leaves, and it's brewed in water of questionable origin. But it's hot, it's familiar, and it provides a psychological comfort that's worth more than its nutritional value. Men will go without food before they go without tea. Jam sometimes makes it to the front. Plum and apple, always plum and apple, never anything else. It's supposed to boost morale. Instead, it becomes a monotonous reminder that variety is not coming. Men spread it on hardtack and pretend they're eating something enjoyable. The sugar provides quick energy at least, though it does nothing for the constant hunger. Fresh food is theoretically available but practically non-existent. Vegetables rot in transit. Bread arrives moldy. Fresh meat spoils before it reaches the front lines. The supply chain is optimized for non-perishables, which means you eat preserved food exclusively. Scurvy is a real concern. Men's teeth loosen. Their gums bleed. They develop skin lesions. This is a disease from the age of sail, showing up in 1916 because fresh fruits and vegetables don't exist in your diet. The hunger is constant. You're burning maybe 3,500 to 4,000 calories per day just existing in these conditions. The physical labor of carrying stretchers, performing surgery, moving supplies, that adds another 1,000 to 2,000 calories. You should be eating 5,000 calories per day. You're getting maybe 2,500 on a good day. The math doesn't work out. You lose weight steadily. Your ribs become visible. Your face hollows. Your hands shake from malnutrition. Meal times are theoretically structured but practically chaotic. Breakfast is supposed to be at dawn. But dawn is often when attacks happen, so breakfast gets skipped. Lunch is supposed to be midday. But midday is when casualties are flowing in, so lunch gets eaten cold hours late if at all. Dinner is supposed to be evening. But evening brings its own work, and you eat standing up, shoveling food into your mouth between patients. The act of eating becomes joyless. You're not savoring food, you're consuming fuel. Taste doesn't matter. Texture doesn't matter. You eat because you have to, because if you don't, you'll collapse. Men develop weird eating habits. Some eat everything as fast as possible, afraid it will be taken away. Others ration obsessively, making each biscuit last as long as possible. Some stop eating entirely, their appetite killed by stress and horror, and they waste away until they're evacuated for malnutrition. Water for drinking is rationed strictly. 1 liter per day, sometimes less. This has to cover all your hydration needs. In summer, in the heat, working 12-hour shifts, sweating through your clothes, 1 liter is nothing. You're constantly dehydrated. Your urine is dark and scanty. Your lips crack. Your tongue sticks to the roof of your mouth. You'd kill for a cold glass of water. You settle for a warm sip from your canteen that tastes like rust and chlorine. The water itself is questionable. It comes from wells near the front, and those wells are surrounded by years of warfare. Corpses, latrines, chemical contamination. The water is treated with chlorine to kill bacteria, which makes it safe-ish but also makes it taste terrible. You drink it anyway because the alternative is dying of thirst. Sometimes, rarely, food packages arrive from home. Cakes that have gone moldy. Cookies that have crumbled into powder. Chocolate that's melted and re-solidified into a gray mess. These packages are treasures anyway, not for what's in them but for what they represent. Proof that somewhere, someone remembers you exist. You share the contents with anyone nearby because keeping it to yourself feels wrong. The officers eat better than you, obviously. They have access to private supplies. They can purchase additional food from rear area vendors. They're not eating hardtack and bully beef exclusively. This creates resentment, a slow-burning anger that one more indignity has been added to an already unbearable situation. But you keep your mouth shut because complaining doesn't change anything. Some men turn to scavenging. Abandoned houses near the front might have jars of preserves in the cellar. Destroyed farms might have root vegetables still in the ground. Men risk their lives crawling into no man's land to strip rations from dead soldiers, friend and enemy alike. A German soldier's rations are no better than yours, but they're different, and different feels like variety. Cooking facilities are minimal. You might have a small spirit stove or a brazier. Fuel is scarce. Cooking draws attention from enemy artillery. Smoke gives away your position. Most food is eaten cold or barely warmed. The act of preparing a hot meal, something that takes 5 minutes in peacetime, becomes a dangerous, resource-intensive operation that's often not worth the risk. The psychological impact of constant hunger is underestimated. Your thinking becomes fuzzy. Your hands shake. Your temper shortens. You make mistakes you wouldn't make if you were properly nourished. You're trying to perform complex medical procedures while your brain is literally starving for glucose. It's not sustainable, but it's your reality. And here's the cruelest irony. Behind the lines, there's food. There are warehouses full of proper rations. There are bakeries producing fresh bread. There are kitchens preparing hot meals. It's all back there, miles away, inaccessible. The supply chain can't or won't get it to you. So you starve within sight of plenty, eating iron rations and biscuit dust while your body slowly consumes itself. This is your daily fight for calories. This is your constant battle against hunger. And tomorrow you'll get the same stale biscuit, the same questionable meat, the same bitter tea. Your stomach will cramp. Your hands will shake. And you'll force it down anyway because the alternative is collapsing, and you can't collapse because men need you. So you eat and you hate it and you keep going. Because that's all there is to do. Chapter 10. The latrine situation. A throne of horror. You need to relieve yourself. This is not optional. Your bowels are cramping, probably from the questionable bully beef you ate 6 hours ago, possibly from the dysentery that's running rampant through the trenches. You've been holding it for as long as possible because using the latrine is an experience you'd rather avoid. But biology doesn't care about your preferences. The latrine is located about 50 yards from the aid post, down a communication trench that's ankle-deep in mud. You make your way carefully, trying not to slip, trying not to think about what you're about to experience. Other men pass you, heading back, their faces grim. Nobody makes eye contact. Using the latrine is a shared shame, a necessary humiliation that everyone endures and nobody discusses. Let's talk about sanitation, or rather the complete lack thereof. In a proper civilization, human waste is dealt with through sewage systems and running water. In the trenches of World War I, human waste is dealt with by digging holes in the ground and hoping they don't overflow. They always overflow. The latrine is a pit maybe 8 feet deep and 4 feet across. Wooden planks have been placed across it as a sort of seat. The planks are slick with rain and other fluids. The smell hits you from 20 feet away. A concentrated miasma of human waste, decomposition, and chemical disinfectant that's fighting a losing battle. Your eyes water. Your stomach lurches. You breathe through your mouth and immediately regret it because now you can taste it. There's no privacy. No walls, no door, no curtain. You're exposed to anyone passing by. Artillery makes regular attempts to kill you while you're at your most vulnerable. Using the latrine means accepting that you might die with your pants down, quite literally. Men have been hit by shells while defecating. Their bodies are found in pieces, scattered around the latrine pit. This is how they're remembered. You position yourself on the plank, squatting because actually sitting down means making contact with a surface that thousands of dysentery-infected men have used before you. The plank creaks ominously under your weight. You hold on to a support beam with one hand, trying to maintain balance, trying not to look down into the pit because what you'd see would haunt you. The pit is full nearly to capacity. Layer upon layer of human waste, some of it weeks old, fermenting in the warmth of summer or freezing solid in winter. Lime has been thrown in to speed decomposition and reduce smell. It hasn't worked. Nothing works. The smell is a physical presence, so strong it feels like it's coating your lungs. And there are flies, thousands of them. They carpet the surface of the waste, a living blanket of insects. They swarm around you, landing on your face, your hands, your exposed rear end. You swat at them futilely. They come right back. These flies were just feeding on decomposing feces. Now they're on your lips. Now they're on your food the next time you eat. This is how disease spreads. This is how men get typhoid, cholera, dysentery. Speaking of dysentery, you probably have it. Everyone has it. It's endemic in the trenches. The symptoms are familiar. Constant diarrhea, abdominal cramps, dehydration. You're losing fluids faster than you can replace them. Your anus is raw from constant wiping with whatever scrap of cloth or paper you could find. Each trip to the latrine is agony. And you make the trip maybe 10 times a day. Toilet paper is a luxury you don't have. You use whatever's available. Old newspapers, pages torn from books, spare scraps of cloth. Sometimes you use leaves if you can find any that aren't contaminated with gas. Sometimes you use nothing and just do your best with your hand and hope you can wash it later. Hygiene is a distant memory. Dignity is a joke. The latrine fills up fast. With hundreds of men using it daily, the pit reaches capacity in days. Then what? Ideally, a new pit is dug and the old one is filled in. In reality, men keep using the full pit because there's no alternative. The waste piles above ground level. It spills over the sides. It creates a bog of filth that men have to navigate to reach the planks. You step in it. It soaks into your boots. You track it back to the aid post. This is your life now. Winter brings a different horror. The waste freezes solid. The latrine becomes a pyramid of frozen feces and urine, rock hard and impossible to deal with. Men balance on top of this frozen monument to human necessity, squatting precariously, hoping they don't slip and fall. Some do slip. They crash into the frozen waste pile, breaking bones, getting covered in filth. They come to you seeking treatment. You try not to vomit while treating them. At night, the latrine is even worse. There's no light beyond whatever moon and stars are visible. You navigate by memory and feel, stepping carefully, trying not to fall into the pit or onto the waste-slicked ground around it. Men trip constantly. Men fall into the pit sometimes, sinking waist-deep or deeper into human waste. The extraction process is horrifying for everyone involved. Disease vectors are everywhere. The latrines are breeding grounds for every pathogen imaginable. Cholera thrives in the fecal contamination. Typhoid spreads through flies that land on waste and then on food. Dysentery passes from man to man through contaminated water and unwashed hands. You treat these diseases constantly, knowing that the conditions guarantee they'll keep spreading. The smell permeates everything. Your clothes, your hair, your skin. You can't escape it. Even when you're far from the latrine, you can smell it. A persistent reminder of the fundamental breakdown of sanitation. Men develop chronic sinus problems from the constant assault on their nasal passages. Some lose their sense of smell entirely, which they consider a blessing. Urination is handled slightly better, with designated areas or even bottles for convenience. But feces require the trip to the latrine pit, and there's no avoiding it. Your body doesn't care about artillery or gas or the horror waiting for you. When you need to go, you go. Or you don't, and you develop impaction, constipation so severe it requires manual removal. You've had to perform that procedure on men whose embarrassment at needing it is almost worse than the physical discomfort. Officers have access to better facilities, naturally. They might have a bucket with a seat, emptied by orderlies. They might have a slightly more private latrine, positioned further from the front. This class division extends even to defecation, a final insult to the common soldier who's being asked to die for his country while squatting over a pit of shit. The psychological impact is real. Men develop bathroom anxiety, an inability to relax enough to defecate even when they desperately need to. They hold it for days, making themselves sick. Others develop the opposite problem, losing all bowel control from dysentery, shitting themselves in their bunks, their uniforms, their sleep. The humiliation is crushing. These are grown men, reduced to crying over their inability to control basic bodily functions. And you're supposed to maintain some semblance of hygiene while dealing with all this. You're supposed to wash your hands after using the latrine. With what water? The communal bucket filled with chlorinated water that 200 men have already used today? You dip your hands in, swirl them around, and pretend you're clean. You're not clean. You'll never be clean again. This is the latrine situation. This is your bathroom experience for the duration. No running water, no flush toilet, no soap, no privacy, no dignity. Just a hole in the ground filled with the waste of desperate men, surrounded by flies and death and the ever-present smell of human degradation. And tomorrow you'll make the trip again, and the day after, and every day until this war ends or you do. Welcome to the throne room. Welcome to one of the truths nobody tells you about war. Sometimes the worst enemy isn't the one shooting at you, but the basic biological need to defecate in conditions designed to strip away every shred of human dignity. Chapter 11. Sleep deprivation. The waking nightmare. You're so tired you can't remember when you last slept. Not a nap. Not a few hours of fitful unconsciousness. Actual restorative sleep. It's been days. Maybe a week. Time has become meaningless. A blur of casualties and bandages and blood, all melting together into one endless shift that never stops. Your eyes burn constantly. They're dry and gritty, like someone poured sand under your eyelids. You blink and it hurts. Your vision is blurred, going double at the edges. You've started seeing things that aren't there. Shadows moving in the corner of your eye, shapes that disappear when you look directly at them. Your brain is hallucinating from exhaustion. Let's talk about sleep, or rather the total lack of it. The human body needs about 8 hours of sleep per day to function properly. You're getting maybe 2 to 4 hours if you're lucky, snatched in brief periods between casualty waves, always interrupted, never enough. This is not sustainable. Your body knows it. Your mind knows it. But the wounded keep coming, and sleep is a luxury you can't afford. The aid post never closes. There are no set hours. Casualties arrive at all times of day and night, and when they arrive, you work. An attack starts at 3 a.m. and you're awake, treating the wounded who start flowing in by 3:30 a.m. The attack continues through dawn. You work through it. The sun rises. You're still working. The sun sets. Still working. Midnight comes. Still working. And then another attack starts and the cycle continues. You've developed what the other medical personnel call the 1,000-yard stare. That blank, haunted look of someone who's pushed so far past exhaustion they've entered a fugue state. You're functioning on autopilot, your hands performing procedures while your mind wanders, dissociating from the horror around you. You've treated wounds you don't remember treating. You've performed surgeries you have no recollection of. Your brain is protecting itself by not forming memories of this nightmare. The few times you do manage to lie down, sleep doesn't come easy. Your brain is still in crisis mode, flooded with adrenaline and cortisol, too wired to shut down despite your body's desperate need. You lie there in the dark, listening to the artillery, listening to men moaning, your mind racing through the day's cases. Did you miss something? Could you have saved that man if you'd made a different choice? The thoughts spiral endlessly. When sleep does come, it's broken and unrefreshing. You're asleep for 15 minutes and someone shakes you awake. More casualties arriving. You stumble up, disoriented, not sure where you are or what time it is. You splash water on your face and get back to work. 20 minutes later, you're swaying on your feet, micro-sleeping standing up, your brain shutting down for seconds at a time while you try to suture a wound. The physical effects of sleep deprivation are accumulating. Your hands shake constantly now. Your fine motor control is shot. Threading a needle takes 3 attempts instead of 1. Your reaction time is slowed to the point where you're dangerous. You drop instruments. You stumble over nothing. You reach for supplies that aren't where you thought they were. Your immune system is compromised. In conditions where disease is rampant and you're constantly exposed to infected wounds and contaminated fluids, this is a death sentence. You develop a cough that won't go away. Your throat is constantly sore. You've got a low-grade fever that spikes every evening. But you keep working because there's no one to replace you. Cognitively, you're falling apart. Your memory is unreliable. You forget instructions minutes after receiving them. You have to check your work constantly because you can't trust your own recollection. Simple mathematics becomes difficult. You're trying to calculate morphine dosages and your brain won't cooperate. Numbers swimming in your vision, refusing to add up properly. Your emotional regulation is gone. You find yourself crying at things that shouldn't make you cry, then laughing at things that aren't funny. Your mood swings wildly from desperate hope to crushing despair within minutes. You snap at people for minor infractions. You're irritable, paranoid, convinced everyone is judging you, that you're failing at your job. Maybe you are. You can't tell anymore. The hallucinations are getting worse. You see men who aren't there. You hear voices calling your name when no one's around. You smell things that aren't present. Flowers in the midst of rot. Fresh bread in a dugout that smells like death. Your brain is desperately trying to impose normalcy on an abnormal situation. And it's failing, creating sensory experiences that provide brief comfort before reality crashes back. Other medical personnel are in the same condition. You see it in their faces, the same exhaustion, the same dissociation. You take breaks together when possible, huddling in a corner, too tired to speak, just existing in shared misery. Some men have started using alcohol to cope, drinking themselves into unconsciousness during the few hours when casualties slow. Others use drugs, pilfered morphine, anything to escape this relentless exhaustion. The officers don't understand. They see you as medical staff, protected from the worst of the fighting, positioned behind the lines. They don't see the hours. They don't see the endless stream of broken bodies. They don't see you working 30-hour shifts straight through. When you ask for relief, for more personnel, for the ability to rest, you're told the same thing. Everyone's stretched thin, make do with what you have. You've started making dangerous mistakes. You almost gave a patient the wrong medication yesterday. You sutured a wound inside out and had to redo it. You forgot to check for an exit wound on a bullet injury. These are rookie errors, things you'd never do under normal circumstances. But your brain is operating at maybe 30% capacity, and that remaining 30% is spread across too many simultaneous demands. Sleep becomes an obsession. You fantasize about it. A real bed, clean sheets, 8 uninterrupted hours. It's an impossible dream, as far from your reality as a tropical beach or a 5-course meal. What you get is a stretcher on the floor of a dugout, a thin blanket that smells like blood and disinfectant, and maybe 90 minutes before the next wave of wounded arrives. Some medical personnel break completely. You've seen it happen. A man just stops in the middle of a shift and announces he can't do this anymore. Sometimes he walks away and never comes back. Sometimes he puts a gun in his mouth. Sometimes he just sits down and stares at nothing, completely catatonic, broken by the combination of horror and exhaustion. There's no medical discharge for mental breakdown. There's just a notation in the records and a replacement who'll probably break the same way in a few months. The irony is that you're treating men for shell shock, for combat fatigue, for nervous breakdowns, while you're actively experiencing your own mental collapse from the same root causes. You prescribe rest you can't give yourself. You tell men they need to be pulled off the line for recovery while you continue working yourself into the ground. Physician, heal thyself. Except you can't. There's no one to cover for you. There's no relief coming. Coffee helps when it's available. The caffeine jolts your system, gives you another hour or two of pseudo-functionality. But caffeine on an empty stomach and an exhausted body leads to jitters and nausea and a crash that leaves you worse off than before. You drink it anyway. What choice do you have? The worst times are the quiet periods, the brief lulls when casualties aren't arriving. Your body recognizes this as a potential time to rest and tries to shut down immediately. You fight to stay awake because you know the lull won't last, but your eyelids are so heavy, and your cot is right there, and maybe just 5 minutes, you wake up 2 hours later in a panic, convinced you've missed something critical, that men died while you slept. Sometimes they did. Night watch is torture. 2 a.m. to 6 a.m., the hours when human circadian rhythms are most strongly pushing for sleep. You're supposed to be alert, ready for emergencies. You pace to stay awake. You splash water on your face. You pinch yourself. You bite your tongue until it bleeds. Anything to avoid the pull of unconsciousness. Artillery fire almost becomes welcome because the adrenaline spike keeps you alert. And tomorrow you'll do it again. And the day after, you'll keep operating on 2 hours of sleep out of every 24. Your body consuming itself, your mind fragmenting, your ability to function degrading day by day. This is your marathon, except there's no finish line. There's just the slow grind of accumulating exhaustion until either the war ends or you collapse completely. Welcome to sleep deprivation. Welcome to the special hell of being too tired to live but unable to die. Trapped in a waking nightmare where every blink is a fight against unconsciousness. And the worst part? This is normal. This is expected. This is just how it is. So you drink more coffee, slap yourself awake, and stumble back to work. Because the alternative is letting men die, and you're not ready to surrender to that. Not yet. Chapter 12. The Wounded Animal. Dealing with horses. The scream of a horse is one of the worst sounds you've ever heard. It's high-pitched, agonized, almost human in its expression of pain and fear. You hear it now, cutting through the general din of the front, and your heart sinks. Horse casualties. Another dimension of hell you're expected to manage. A soldier drags a terrified horse toward the aid post. The animal is massive, easily 1,200 pounds of panicked muscle. It's been hit by shrapnel, probably from the same shell that killed its rider. Its flank is torn open, a gaping wound that exposes muscle and possibly lung tissue. Blood streams down its side. Its eyes are rolling white with fear. You're a medic trained to treat humans. You've had maybe one lecture on veterinary medicine, if that. But here's the brutal reality. Horses are critical to the war effort. They transport supplies, pull artillery, carry cavalry. A dead horse is a significant loss. So yes, you're expected to treat them despite having no training, no proper equipment, and frankly no idea what you're doing. Let's talk about horses in World War I, because their suffering is overlooked and immense. Both sides are using hundreds of thousands of horses. They're everywhere, pulling wagons, carrying supplies, moving guns, and they're dying at catastrophic rates. Artillery doesn't discriminate. Shells that miss soldiers hit horses. Gas attacks kill horses as readily as men. Disease runs rampant through horse lines. The mortality rate is staggering. The horse in front of you is in shock. It's trembling. It's breathing rapid and shallow. You need to calm it down before you can treat it, but you're not a horse whisperer. You approach slowly, speaking in low tones, hoping you don't get kicked. An 1,200-pound animal in pain is incredibly dangerous. One well-placed kick could kill you instantly. You manage to grab the horse's bridle and tie it to a post. Not ideal, but it keeps the animal relatively still. Now you examine the wound. It's bad. The shrapnel has opened a section of the horse's side, maybe 8 inches long and 3 inches deep. You can see the ribs. You might be seeing part of a lung. The bleeding is significant but not immediately life-threatening, assuming you can get it under control. You have no veterinary supplies. What you have is your regular medical kit designed for humans. You're going to make do. You clean the wound with water, the horse flinching and trying to pull away with each touch. You pack the wound with gauze, same as you do for a person but on a much larger scale. You're using entire rolls of bandages just to fill this one injury. The horse needs pain relief, but morphine dosage for a horse is very different from dosage for a human. Too little and it doesn't help. Too much and you'll kill the animal. You guess using your limited knowledge and hoping for the best. You inject the morphine into the horse's neck muscle, the needle barely making it through the tough skin. The horse barely notices. The pain from its wound is too overwhelming. Suturing a horse wound is nightmare difficulty. The skin is thick and tough. Your needles barely penetrate. You're using all your strength to drive each stitch through, your hands cramping from the effort. The horse is moving constantly, not violently but enough to make precision impossible. You do your best, creating rough stitches that pull the wound edges together without really closing them properly. Infection is almost guaranteed. Horses are lying in mud, standing in filth, living in conditions that would horrify peacetime veterinarians. A wound this size contaminated with dirt and shrapnel fragments, is going to get infected no matter what you do. You dump iodine over the sutured wound, hoping it helps, knowing it probably won't. And here's the brutal calculus. Is this horse worth saving? That sounds callous, but it's a legitimate question in the context of wartime resource management. A horse with a relatively minor wound that will heal and return to service? Yes, treat it. A horse with catastrophic injuries that will require weeks of care and still might not recover. Maybe it's more humane to put it down. You don't have the authority to make that call. Officers make those decisions. But you're the one providing the medical assessment they base their decision on. This horse, significant wound, high infection risk, needs extended recovery time. In peacetime, it would get that recovery time. In war, it might get euthanized to free up resources for horses that can return to service faster. The horse you're treating now is one of the lucky ones. It's got a survivable wound, it was brought to you relatively quickly, and treatment is possible. But for every horse you treat, there are dozens dying in the field, their injuries too severe or too far from help. They lie in no man's land, screaming until they bleed out or artillery finishes them off. The screaming is what gets to you. Wounded men scream. Yes, but there's something about a horse's scream that cuts through all your defenses. It's pure animal terror and pain, a sound that predates language, that speaks directly to some primitive part of your brain. You'll hear those screams in your nightmares, mixed with the screams of dying men, all blending into one chorus of agony. Gas attacks are particularly cruel to horses. They can't use gas masks. When gas settles in an area where horses are tethered, they breathe it in helplessly. Chlorine gas burns their lungs the same as it does human lungs. Mustard gas blisters their skin and eyes. They panic, they bolt, they die choking and blind and terrified. After a gas attack, you'll find dozens of horses dead in their lines, or worse, still alive but suffering from exposure. You've had to euthanize horses. It's part of your job when the veterinary personnel are overwhelmed or unavailable. The standard method is a bullet to the brain placed just above the eyes. It's supposed to be quick and humane. Sometimes it is. Sometimes you miss or the horse moves and you create more suffering instead of ending it. Those are the ones that haunt you. Trench foot affects horses too. They stand in mud for days, same as soldiers. Their hooves develop infections, their legs rot. You've seen horses unable to stand, their feet so damaged they can't bear weight. These horses have to be destroyed. There's no saving them. A horse that can't walk is a dead horse in wartime. The relationship between soldiers and horses is complex. These animals are tools of war, yes, but they're also companions. Men form bonds with the horses they work with daily. When a horse is injured or killed, there's genuine grief. You've seen hardened soldiers cry over dead horses, mourning them as deeply as they'd mourn fallen comrades. Maybe more because horses never chose to be here. And then there's the sheer volume. In a major offensive, you might see hundreds of horse casualties. You can't treat them all. You do triage, same as with human casualties, deciding which horses get treatment and which get a bullet. The ones that get left behind die slowly, and their screams mix with the artillery, and you try not to think about it too much. The disposal of dead horses is its own logistical nightmare. An 1,200-pound carcass can't be moved easily, can't be buried without heavy equipment. Dead horses lie where they fall, rotting, adding to the general miasma of decomposition that permeates the front. They bloat in the heat, their bodies swelling grotesquely. Eventually they burst, spreading disease and attracting flies. Sometimes, in extreme situations, dead horses become part of the landscape. They're incorporated into trench walls as sandbag substitutes. They're used as cover in no man's land. They're so common that soldiers stop noticing them, stepping over equine corpses as casually as they'd avoid puddles. This normalization of mass animal death is another layer of desensitization the war creates. You've developed a complicated relationship with horse casualties. Part of you hates treating them because you're not trained for it, because they're dangerous to work on, because every minute spent on a horse is a minute you're not treating humans. Part of you feels deeply for these innocent animals, dragged into human warfare, suffering and dying for conflicts they don't understand. part of you is just numb, adding horse casualties to the long list of horrors you've become accustomed to. The horse you just treated is finished. You've done what you can with inadequate supplies and insufficient knowledge. It's marked for evacuation to a veterinary station further back, assuming one is available. It might survive. It might not. Either way, you've got other patients waiting, human ones, and you need to move on. But that scream lingers. It always does. High and terrible and utterly helpless. Just another sound in the symphony of suffering that is the Western Front. And tomorrow, there will be more horses, more wounds, more impossible decisions about what deserves treatment and what deserves mercy. Welcome to Veterinary Medicine Wartime Edition. It's exactly as awful as you feared. Chapter 13. Shell shock, minds breaking in real time. The soldier sitting in front of you is shaking. Not from cold, not from injury. He's trembling all over. A constant fine tremor that makes him look like he's vibrating. His eyes are wide, staring at nothing. He's not responding to questions. He's not responding to his name. He's somewhere else, locked inside his own mind, and you have no idea how to bring him back. Shell shock, battle fatigue, neurasthenia. It has a dozen different names, none of them adequate to describe what you're witnessing. The complete psychological breakdown of a human being. And you're expected to treat it, despite having no training, no understanding of what's actually happening, and a medical establishment that's still debating whether this is even real or just cowardice dressed up as illness. Let's talk about shell shock, because it's everywhere on the front and nobody knows what to do about it. The official line keeps shifting. Early in the war, shell shock was thought to be caused by the physical concussion of artillery shells, tiny hemorrhages in the brain from the pressure waves. That theory fell apart when soldiers started developing the same symptoms without ever being near an explosion. The current theory, if you can call it that, is that prolonged stress causes some kind of nervous system breakdown. The human mind simply wasn't designed to handle weeks or months of constant terror, constant bombardment, constant proximity to death. Eventually, something breaks. The symptoms are varied and bizarre. Tremors, paralysis, mutism, blindness with no physical cause, deafness, amnesia, complete catatonia. This soldier was brought in by his mates. They found him standing in the trench, staring at the wall, not moving. When they tried to move him, he started screaming and didn't stop for 20 minutes. Now he's silent again, still trembling. His hands clenched into fists so tight that his fingernails are cutting into his palms. Blood drips from his closed fingers, but he doesn't seem to notice. What are you supposed to do with this? Your medical training covered broken bones, hemorrhages, infections. Nobody taught you how to fix a broken mind. The official treatment protocols are vague. Rest, quiet, reassurance. In practice, that means keeping the soldier somewhere relatively safe until he either recovers or gets worse. But you don't have facilities for long-term psychiatric care. You've got a dugout that's constantly under bombardment. You've got other casualties who need immediate attention. You've got maybe 30 minutes to assess this man and make a decision. Evacuate him to a rear area hospital, try to treat him here, or send him back to his unit and hope he recovers on his own. You try talking to him. His name is Private Collins. He's 19. He's been in the trenches for 7 months. 7 months of watching friends die, of living in constant fear, of the grinding daily horror that is frontline service. And something finally broke. Collins doesn't respond to your voice. You touch his shoulder gently and he flinches violently, arms coming up to protect his head. He's reliving something, some moment of trauma, playing on repeat inside his skull. You can't reach him through the replay. Here's where it gets complicated. Some officers don't believe shell shock is real. They think it's malingering, cowardice, men faking illness to escape duty. This attitude has led to truly horrific situations. Men showing clear signs of psychological breakdown have been declared fit for duty and sent back to the trenches. Some have been executed for cowardice when they were unable to function. The British military shot more than 300 of its own soldiers during World War I, many of them almost certainly suffering from what we'd now recognize as severe PTSD. Your assessment matters. If you diagnose Collins with shell shock and recommend evacuation, you're saving him from the front. But you're also potentially marking him as a coward in the eyes of officers who don't believe in psychological casualties. If you send him back to duty and he gets someone killed because he can't function, that's on you too. You make notes on his condition: severe tremor, non-responsive to verbal stimuli, possible combat-induced neurosis, recommend evacuation for psychiatric evaluation. You mark him for transport and hope he gets to someone who can actually help him. He probably won't. The psychiatric facilities are overwhelmed, understaffed, and operating on theories that are barely more advanced than medieval humors. But here's another layer. Shell shock isn't just the dramatic cases like Collins. It's endemic. Almost every man on the front is showing some symptoms of psychological stress. Insomnia, nightmares, hypervigilance, emotional numbness, depression, suicidal ideation. These are men operating at the absolute edge of their mental capacity, held together by nothing but inertia and the knowledge that if they break, they might be shot for cowardice. You're experiencing it yourself. The nightmares have become worse. You wake up choking, convinced you're drowning in gas. You flinch at sudden sounds. You've developed a tremor in your left hand that won't go away. You're drinking more, using alcohol to numb yourself enough to sleep. You've thought about morphine, about using your medical access to self-medicate, but you've seen where that road leads. Some men break suddenly, like Collins. One moment they're functioning, the next they're catatonic or hysterical or violent. But most men break slowly, a gradual erosion of mental stability that accelerates until there's nothing left. You can see it happening in the men around you. The 1,000-yard stares, the emotional flatness, the mechanical way they go through motions without any visible engagement. Treatment options are limited and often cruel. Some psychiatric hospitals are using electroshock therapy, running electrical current through patients to cure them. Some are using humiliation and discipline, treating shell shock like a character flaw that can be corrected through shame. Some are using drugs, sedatives that turn men into zombies. Very few are using what might actually help: genuine rest, proper therapy, removal from traumatic situations. The men who do get evacuated for shell shock face their own hell. They're sent to hospitals far from the front, which should be good, but they're often treated with suspicion and contempt by medical staff who think they're faking. They're subjected to treatments that range from useless to actively harmful. And they're facing the stigma of having broken, of being weak, of failing to maintain the stiff upper lip that British culture demands. Some men recover. Given enough time away from the front, enough rest, enough distance from the trauma, the human mind can heal itself to some degree. These men might eventually return to duty, though they're never quite the same. Others never recover. They spend the rest of their lives in psychiatric institutions, broken permanently by a few months in hell. And here's the cruel irony. The military system creates the conditions for shell shock and then punishes the men who develop it. The constant bombardment, the lack of rotation, the impossible demands, the total absence of mental health support. All of this guarantees that men will break. But when they do, they're treated as defective, as weak, as somehow failing in their duty. You've started keeping informal records of shell shock cases because the official records are inconsistent. You've documented dozens in the past few months. The rate is accelerating. Men who've been holding on through sheer willpower are reaching their limits. The longer this war continues, the more minds it will destroy completely. Private Collins is being loaded onto a stretcher for evacuation. He's still trembling, still non-responsive. You've done what you can, which is almost nothing. He'll be someone else's problem now. But tomorrow, there will be another Collins. Another young man whose mind couldn't handle what he's been subjected to. And you'll make the same assessment, fill out the same paperwork, and feel the same helplessness. Welcome to shell shock. Welcome to the invisible casualty rate that nobody wants to acknowledge. Welcome to the proof that the human mind, like the human body, has limits. And welcome to your own slow descent into the same condition, because you're living in the same nightmare, seeing the same horrors, and your mind is eroding just as surely as theirs. The only difference is you're still functional. For now. Chapter 14. The death rate. Statistics written in blood. You've stopped counting. Officially, you're supposed to maintain records of casualties treated, outcomes, dispositions. In practice, your record-keeping has devolved into rough tallies scratched into the wall of the dugout. This many treated today. This many died. This many evacuated. The numbers are staggering, and they don't capture the reality of what those numbers mean. Let's talk about death rates because they define your existence. On an average day in a quiet sector, you might see 10 to 20 casualties. On an average day during an offensive, you might see 200. The mathematics of keeping people alive in these conditions simply doesn't work out in your favor. Of the men you treat, maybe 60% will survive long enough to reach a casualty clearing station. That sounds good until you realize it means 40% won't. For out of every 10 men who make it to you alive will die before they can get to proper medical care. Sometimes they die in transport. Sometimes they die waiting for transport. Sometimes they die right in front of you while you're working on someone else. Of the men who reach the CCS, statistics vary wildly. Men with relatively minor injuries might have a 90% survival rate. Men with abdominal injuries might have a 15% survival rate. Men with head wounds might have a 30% survival rate. Men with gas exposure. It depends entirely on the type of gas and the severity of exposure, but survival rates can be as low as 5%. Infection is the silent killer. A man survives the initial wound, survives the surgery, survives the transport to hospital. Then infection sets in. Gangrene, sepsis, tetanus. These kill men days or weeks after their initial injury, long after they've left your care. You'll never know most of these deaths. There'll be statistics compiled by someone else, somewhere behind the lines. But they're still your patients, still men you tried to save. The death rate among medical personnel is lower than frontline infantry, but still significant. Stretcher bearers are dying at rates approaching 20 to 30% in active combat periods. Medical officers and orderlies are being killed by artillery, gas, and random fire. Aid posts are being destroyed. You're safer than the men in the trenches, but not by as much as you'd think. Disease kills more men than combat in some periods. Typhoid, cholera, dysentery, trench fever, influenza. These sweep through the cramped, unsanitary conditions of the front, killing men who survived bullets and shells. The Spanish flu epidemic of 1918 will kill more people than the entire war did. But even now, in 1916, disease is a constant threat that your medical training is largely helpless against. The numbers become abstractions after a while. You can't process them as individual human lives anymore. Today, 43 casualties, 18 dead, 23 evacuated, 2 injured to move. Those numbers could be anything. They're just statistics, until you remember that each one is a person. Each one is someone's son, someone's husband, someone's father. Each one had hopes and dreams and a life before this war consumed everything. You've started recognizing patterns in mortality. Men wounded in the early morning during attacks tend to die more often than men wounded later in the day, simply because it takes longer to get them to treatment. Men wounded in the abdomen have appalling survival rates. Men wounded in the limbs have much better odds, assuming infection doesn't kill them. Men with blast injuries, even if they look intact, often die from internal hemorrhaging you can't see or treat. The age distribution of casualties is depressing. Most of the wounded are young, 18 to 25. The old hands, the veterans who've survived more than a year, are rarer. Either they've been rotated out or they're dead. The survival rate for soldiers who stay in frontline service for extended periods approaches zero eventually. It's not a question of if they'll be killed or wounded, but when. Some deaths are quick. A man takes a bullet through the brainstem and is gone instantly. These are the merciful ones. Some deaths are slow. A man bleeds internally for hours, slowly fading, beyond help, fully conscious and aware that he's dying. These are the ones that make you question why you're even trying. You've developed a sixth sense for who's going to make it and who isn't. There's a look that men get when they're dying, a specific quality to their breathing, a color to their skin. You've seen it enough times that you recognize it instantly now. When you see that look, and knowing doesn't make it easier. The psychological toll of constant death is incalculable. You're surrounded by it. You smell it. You wade through it. It's the baseline of your existence. Men die in front of you. Men die waiting for you. Men die because you made the wrong choice or weren't fast enough or simply because the medical science of 1916 can't save them. The weight of all that death accumulates. Some medics cope by detaching emotionally. They stop seeing the wounded as people and start seeing them as medical problems. This allows them to function but costs them their humanity. Other medics maintain their empathy and crack under the strain, breaking down completely after witnessing one death too many. There's no good option. You either feel everything and go insane, or feel nothing and lose yourself. The bureaucracy of death is its own nightmare. Each casualty is supposed to generate paperwork, personal effects to be collected and sent home, death notifications to be filed, medical records to be completed. In practice, during major offensives, the system breaks down completely. Men die without identification. Bodies are lost or destroyed. Families receive notifications that their sons or husbands are missing, presumed dead, with no details, no closure, no grave to visit. You've written letters to families. Dear Mrs. Thompson, I regret to inform you that your son died of wounds received in action. He did not suffer. He spoke of you at the end. These letters are formulaic lies. Most men do suffer. Most men don't speak coherently at the end. But what else are you going to write? Dear Mrs. Thompson, your son died screaming in agony from an abdominal wound, calling for his mother, drowning in his own blood while I watched helplessly. Truth doesn't serve anyone in this situation. The cumulative effect of the death rate is a kind of moral exhaustion. You start to wonder what the point is. You're fighting to save lives in a system designed to destroy them as efficiently as possible. For every man you save, the military sends him back to the front where he'll probably be killed or wounded again. You're not ending the cycle, you're just prolonging it. And the numbers keep climbing. Hundreds become thousands. Thousands become tens of thousands. The casualty reports from major offensives are staggering. 20,000 men killed in a single day. 60,000 casualties in the first day of the Somme alone. These numbers are so large they lose meaning. How do you comprehend 60,000 casualties? You can't. You process it as data, not reality. You're keeping a tally on the wall. Not of all deaths, you couldn't possibly track that, but of deaths that happened here in this aid post while you were working. The tally marks are approaching 300. 300 men who made it this far and went no further. 300 lives that ended in this small dugout that smells like blood and earth. Tomorrow you'll add more marks to the wall. Next week, more still. The wall will fill up eventually, and you'll start a new wall. The mathematics of death are relentless here. And you're just one medic in one aid post in one section of one front. Multiply your tally by thousands and you start to approach the true scale of the dying. Welcome to the death rate. Welcome to numbers written in blood and pain and loss. Welcome to the realization that you're not really saving lives. You're just choosing which deaths to delay. And tomorrow, the counting continues, because the war continues, and men continue dying at rates that would be unfathomable in any other context. But this is World War I. The unfathomable is ordinary, and you're right in the middle of it. Chapter 15. Mud and Weather. The slow drowning. You're standing in mud up to your ankles. This is an improvement over yesterday, when it was up to your knees. The rain hasn't stopped for 5 days. Everything is wet. Everything is dissolving. The trenches are collapsing. The dugout is flooding. And men are drowning in mud. Literally drowning. Suffocating in thick, soupy earth that pulls them down and won't let go. Let's talk about mud, because it's as much an enemy as bullets or gas. The Western Front is built on clay soil that doesn't drain. Add rain. Add the constant churning of artillery. Add the passage of millions of boots and hooves, and you get a landscape that's more liquid than solid. The mud here isn't like normal mud. It's a thick, glutinous substance that has the consistency of wet concrete and the smell of decomposition, because it's mixed with blood and waste and rotting corpses. You're trying to move through the communication trench to reach a wounded man. Each step is a struggle. You lift your boot and the mud fights to keep it. The suction is incredible. You pull harder and your boot stays in the mud while your foot comes out. You're standing on one leg, hopping, trying to retrieve your boot from the earth's grip while maintaining balance. This is your life now. The wounded man you're trying to reach has been hit by shrapnel. He's lying in a shell hole that's filling with water. By the time you reach him, the water is up to his chest. He can't move. His legs are trapped under something, maybe a fallen beam, maybe debris, maybe just the weight of the mud itself. And the water keeps rising. You try to pull him out. You can't. The mud has him. You call for help. 2 stretcher bearers arrive. 3 of you pulling on one man, and he's not moving. The suction of the mud is stronger than you are. You're going to watch this man drown in a shell hole while you stand 3 feet away, unable to help. One of the bearers has an idea. He starts digging around the man with his hands, trying to break the mud's grip. It works slowly. You're all digging now, scooping mud and water, creating space around the trapped man. Your hands are numb from the cold water. Your back is screaming from the bent position. Artillery is falling nearby, sending up geysers of mud and water. You keep digging. Finally, the man comes free. You haul him out of the shell hole and onto relatively solid ground, which is still mud, but at least it's not liquid. He's hypothermic, shivering violently, his lips blue. He's been lying in that water for who knows how long. Even if his shrapnel wounds don't kill him, the exposure might. Winter brings different horrors. The mud freezes solid, creating a landscape of frozen peaks and valleys that's impossible to navigate. Men slip and fall, breaking bones on the rock-hard earth. The cold is vicious, stealing heat from bodies faster than they can generate it. Frostbite becomes epidemic. You're treating men whose fingers and toes have turned black from cold, dead tissue that has to be amputated. Summer is no better. The sun bakes the mud into concrete, creating dust that gets into everything. The same trenches that were soup in winter become ovens in summer. Men collapse from heatstroke. Dehydration becomes a serious problem. The water rations aren't enough to keep men hydrated in the heat, especially when they're doing hard physical labor. The rain in autumn and spring is relentless. It falls for days without stopping. The trenches become rivers. Men stand in flowing water, trying to bail out their positions with anything they can find. The aid post floods. Water seeps through the sandbags, through the timber roof, through every gap and crack. Your supplies get wet. Your bandages get soaked. Everything is damp and nothing dries. Trench walls collapse in the rain, burying men alive. You're called to dig them out. By the time you reach them, they've suffocated, mouths and lungs full of mud. You've pulled out bodies that are more mud than flesh, their faces caked with earth, their eyes and ears packed with it. These deaths aren't even recorded as combat casualties. They're listed as accidents, as if there's anything accidental about forcing men to live in collapsing mud holes. The mud gets into wounds. Every injury gets contaminated immediately. A simple bullet wound that should heal cleanly becomes infected because mud gets driven deep into the tissue. You're supposed to clean wounds thoroughly before dressing them. In practice, you're scooping mud out of wounds with your fingers, knowing you're not getting it all, knowing infection is almost certain. Equipment fails in the mud. Rifles jam. Machine guns seize up. Artillery pieces sink into the earth and can't be moved. Wagons get stuck and have to be abandoned. The mud is winning a war of attrition against machinery designed for firm ground. And medical equipment isn't immune. Your instruments rust. Your supplies rot. The damp ruins everything. Moving the wounded through mud is nightmarish. Stretcher bearers sink with every step. A journey that should take 10 minutes takes an hour. Men die in transit, not from their wounds but from exposure, lying on stretchers in the rain while bearers struggle through waist-deep mud. Sometimes stretchers have to be abandoned because the bearers physically cannot carry them any further. The wounded man is left in the mud, and maybe someone will come back for him later. Maybe. You've seen men simply give up and sit down in the mud, too exhausted to continue. They sit there and the mud slowly rises around them, and they don't have the energy to stand up again. Some of these men are found later, drowned while sitting upright, pulled under by the weight of the mud and their own fatigue. Others are never found, sinking into the earth, becoming part of the landscape. The smell of mud is the smell of decay. It's rotting vegetation, rotting bodies, rotting everything. The mud is fed by corpses that can't be recovered, slowly decomposing and mixing with the earth. You're walking on the dead. You're standing on them. The mud you're scraping off your boots contains pieces of men who died months ago and were never buried. Rats thrive in the mud. They're everywhere, huge things, fat from feeding on corpses. They swim through the water-filled trenches. They burrow through the mud. They come into the aid post looking for food or warmth. You've woken up with rats on your chest, their claws digging into your uniform. The men hate rats with a passion that exceeds their hatred of the enemy. The psychological impact of the mud is insidious. There's no escape from it. You're always wet. You're always cold. You're always filthy. Your uniform is stiff with dried mud. Your skin is caked with it. You eat mud because it's on your hands and in your food. You breathe mud because it's in the air as dust or mist. The omnipresence of it grinds away at your sanity. Men develop obsessive behaviors around mud. Some try compulsively to stay clean, washing whenever they can, fighting a losing battle against the filth. Others give up entirely, embracing the filth, becoming so covered in mud they're barely recognizable as human. Both approaches lead to the same result. Everyone is filthy all the time and the mud wins. The rain is falling again. You can hear it drumming on the roof of the dugout, a sound that would be peaceful in any other context. Here it's ominous. It means more mud. It means more flooding. It means more men are going to drown in shell holes. It means your already impossible job just got harder. You look down at your hands. They're caked with mud and blood. Impossible to distinguish between the two. Your fingernails are black with grime that won't come out no matter how hard you scrub. Your clothes are wet through, have been wet for days, will probably stay wet for days more. This is your existence. This is normal. Welcome to the mud. Welcome to the slow, grinding horror of fighting a war in a swamp of your own creation. And tomorrow, it will rain again, and the mud will rise, and men will drown, and you'll keep trying to save them while the earth itself tries to pull you all down into its embrace. This is World War I. This is the Western Front. This is hell, but wetter and significantly more disgusting than any theological version you've ever imagined. Conclusion. The full price. So, how's your day been? You woke up in an actual bed, probably, with sheets. Maybe you complained it was uncomfortable. You took a hot shower. Clean water, soap, privacy. You got dressed in clean clothes. You ate breakfast without worrying about weevils or whether the food would make you sick. You checked your phone. You went about your day. Let's recap what you've experienced in this journey through time. You've stood in a regimental aid post on the Western Front. You've performed surgery by candlelight while shells exploded overhead. You've done triage with impossible choices and inadequate time. You've amputated limbs with rusty instruments and no anesthesia. You've watched men die from wounds you couldn't treat, from infections you couldn't prevent, from gas attacks you couldn't save them from. You've lived in mud. You've eaten weevil-infested hardtack. You've used a latrine that was just a hole in the ground. You've worked 30-hour shifts without relief. You've treated enemy soldiers while your own side questioned your loyalty. You've suffered through bombardments that destroyed your aid post around you. You've experienced exhaustion beyond anything you thought possible. You've dealt with trench foot, with gangrene, with shell shock, with horses screaming in agony. You've written letters lying to families about how their sons died. You've collected personal effects from corpses. You've kept tallies of the dead on the wall because there were too many to remember individually. You've made decisions about who gets morphine and who doesn't, knowing both choices lead to suffering. And here's the wildest part. Hundreds of thousands of men lived this reality. This wasn't a hypothetical. This happened. In living memory of people's grandparents and great-grandparents, this was someone's daily existence. The conditions described here are documented historical fact. The casualty rates are real. The medical procedures are real. The suffering is real. Think about the medic who inspired this narrative. Young man, probably in his 20s, with minimal training, thrust into hell and told to save lives with inadequate everything. He functioned in conditions that would break modern trauma surgeons. He worked shifts that violate every labor law ever written. He endured physical and psychological abuse that we now recognize as torture. And he did it day after day after day until the war ended or he broke. Most of them broke. The ones who didn't break during the war broke after. Shell shock, what we now call PTSD, affected nearly everyone who served in frontline medical roles. The suicide rate among World War I veterans was staggering. The alcoholism rate was staggering. The rate of domestic violence, of unemployment, of homelessness, all staggering. These men were destroyed by what they experienced and then abandoned by the society that sent them. But here's the thing nobody tells you about history. It's made of individuals. Each casualty statistic is a person. Each number in the death toll is someone's son, someone's husband, someone's father. The Battle of the Somme had 57,000 British casualties on the first day alone. 57,000 individual tragedies. 57,000 families destroyed. And somewhere in that number are the medics who tried to save them, who failed to save most of them, who carried that failure forever. The medical advances that came from World War I are significant. Blood transfusion, better understanding of infection, improved amputation techniques, the foundation of modern trauma surgery. We owe our current medical capabilities in part to the horrific experimentation ground that was the Western Front. But that knowledge was purchased in blood and suffering and broken minds. Today, when you get a cut, you clean it, apply antiseptic, maybe a bandage. Takes 5 minutes. In World War I, that cut could mean gangrene, could mean amputation, could mean death. The gap between then and now is staggering. We live in a medical miracle age. We just don't realize it because we've never experienced the alternative. So tonight, when you go to bed in your clean sheets, when you take your antibiotics for that infection, when you get your painkillers for that headache, maybe say a quiet thank you. Thank you that you're not standing in a muddy dugout with blood up to your elbows. Thank you that you're not making impossible choices about who lives and who dies. Thank you that you're not watching young men scream themselves to death from gas exposure while you stand there helpless. And maybe remember the medics. Remember the stretcher bearers who ran into fire to save the wounded. Remember the surgeons who operated for days straight. Remember the men who bore witness to humanity at its worst and somehow maintained enough compassion to keep trying to heal. Remember that they gave everything. Their health, their sanity, their futures, to save lives in impossible conditions. The Western Front has been quiet for over a century now. The trenches have been filled in. The battlefields are fields again. Nature has reclaimed the scars. But under the grass, in the earth, are the remnants. Unexploded ordnance. Bones. The ghosts of 1 million men who died in mud and pain and terror. And among those ghosts are the medics, still trying to save one more life, still haunted by the ones they couldn't. You wouldn't have lasted a day as a frontline medic in World War I. Neither would most people. That's not a judgment. It's a recognition of how extreme those conditions were. The men who served in that role were operating at the absolute limit of human endurance, and most of them went past that limit and broke. The fact that any of them survived with any shred of sanity is testament to the incredible resilience of the human spirit. But resilience has a cost. Those medics came home changed, damaged, carrying wounds that never fully healed. They lived the rest of their lives in the shadow of what they'd experienced. Some found peace eventually. Most didn't. They died carrying the war inside them, a burden they could never put down. So the next time you complain about your job being stressful, remember the medic standing in a collapsing dugout, performing surgery by candlelight while shells rain down. The next time you're frustrated with medical bureaucracy, remember the medic rationing morphine among dozens of screaming wounded. The next time you think you're tired, remember the medic on his 30th hour of continuous work with no end in sight. This is what it meant to be a frontline medic in World War I. This is what it cost. This is what they endured so that the wounded had even a slim chance of survival. And this is what we owe them: memory, acknowledgement, the recognition that their sacrifice was real and their suffering matters. Thank you for joining me on this journey into history's darkest corners. I hope it's given you a new appreciation for the medical care available today, for the peace that allows you to sleep safely, for the ordinary comforts we take for granted. And I hope you'll remember the men who had none of those things but kept trying anyway, kept fighting to save lives in the middle of humanity's worst self-inflicted disaster. Sleep well tonight. You've earned it just by making it through this story. And somewhere, in some way, maybe the ghosts of those long-dead medics can rest a little easier knowing they're remembered. Knowing their suffering wasn't meaningless. Knowing that someone, a century later, took the time to understand what they endured. Good night.